Come close now, children. Come close. Sit here on this hard ground where the dust rises with old memory and the wind carries voices them white folks tried to bury. I'm gonna tell you about a woman the world wanted to forget, but the ancestors won't let die. A story that lives in the salt of tears, in the scream caught in the throat, in the fire that burns in the spirit of them who survived the iron, the Middle Passage, and the auction block where babies was ripped from their mama's breast like chickens at market. I'm speaking of Lucy de Sal, Lucy of the Salt. Small woman with quiet steps, skin dark as wet mahogany, slave girl the white folks swore would never lift her eyes. But they was wrong. Lord have mercy, they was wrong. 'Cause inside that woman burned something different, something not even whip, nor hunger, nor chain, nor post could kill. An ancient fire, older than them cotton fields, older than the lash, older than the English of them people who thought they owned everything. A fire brought from across the ocean, in the belly of them ships where our ancestors died stacked like flour sacks. That fire was Lucy's soul, strong as mountain, quiet as storm before thunder strikes. And when you hear the hot wind blowing from the south carrying that smell of burned salt, know this: Lucy is passing through. Now settle down, open your ears, let the memory wash over you like river water over stone. 'Cause this story, Lord of Glory, this story gonna show you what happens when suffering meets justice, when salt meets fire, and when a woman's soul decides, enough. Now listen here, child. I'm gonna speak plain and I'm gonna speak true, 'cause that's the only way this testimony worth telling. My name don't matter much no more. I'm just an old soul carrying voices of the gone ones, a wandering keeper of what them history books won't never print. I'm one of them who survived, one of them who's seen things so terrible even prayer couldn't fix it. In them days of deep sorrow, down in the heart of Alabama where the red clay drinks blood like thirsty earth drinks rain, there stood a plantation called Wycliffe. Big house white as bleached bone, fields stretching far as eye could see, and quarters, Lord Jesus, them quarters, lined up in crooked rows like tombstones for the living dead. Wycliffe Plantation was a sufferin' place, kin. The kind of land that carried heavy spirits in every corner. Folks swear on their lives they seen haints walking between them cabin rows at midnight, chains rattling though nobody wore none. The earth itself remembered. It held the screams, the blood, the tears of generations. Old wise ones used to say, that ground cursed, it done drunk too much pain. Master Wycliffe was a cold man, but he wasn't the devil of that place. No, sir. The true demon walked on two legs and went by the name Jonathan Pike, the overseer. Man of iron with eyes like frozen pond water, and a heart blacker than sin itself. Pike was the kind of white man who took pleasure in breaking folk. Not just their bodies, child, but their spirits. He believed a slave was like a wild horse, had to be broken complete, had to learn fear so deep it lived in the bones. Now in them quarters lived all manner of suffering creatures. Field hands with backs scarred like tree bark, house servants who moved like shadows, children born into bondage who never knew their own worth, and among them, quiet as morning mist, was Ondai, Lucy. Folks said Lucy was small, said she was plain, said she kept her head down and her mouth shut, just like a good slave girl's supposed to do. But the elders, them old ones who still remembered Africa, who still whispered prayers in languages the white man couldn't understand, they looked at Lucy different. They seen something in her eyes, something ancient, something that made them nod slow and say, that one there, she carries something powerful inside. She got ancestor fire. Lucy never spoke much, never caused no ruckus, never drew no attention. She worked the cotton fields from can't see to can't see, fingers bleeding from them sharp bowls, back bent under the burning sun. At night she'd return to her cabin, just a dark hole with dirt floor and gaps in the walls where winter wind cut through. And she'd sit quiet, staring at nothing, like she was listening to voices nobody else could hear. Her mama had died on the auction block in Charleston when Lucy was just 7 years old, sold away screaming Lucy's name while men in fine coats counted money and laughed. Her daddy got whipped to death 3 years later for stealing a piece of salt pork to feed his starving children. Lucy had one brother once, sweet boy named Samuel, but he got sold south to the sugar fields of Louisiana, and that was the last anyone heard of him. Them sugar plantations was death sentences. Folks called them the end of nowhere, so Lucy was alone. Alone in the way only enslaved folk could be alone, surrounded by people but carrying a grief so private, so deep, it had no words. She became a shadow, a ghost in plain sight. The kind of woman white folks don't even see because they don't need to. Just another field hand, just another piece of property, but inside, oh Lord, inside Lucy was something else entirely. She remembered her grandmother, a woman brought straight from Africa, from a place called Dahomey, where warriors was women and queens walked with their heads high. Grandmother told Lucy stories before she passed, stories of spirits that protected the righteous, stories of power that couldn't be chained, stories of ancestors who watched from the other side and waited for the right moment to move through the living and set things straight. "Lucy, child," Grandmother used to say, voice low like distant thunder, "you got royal blood in you. Don't matter what these white folk call you. Don't matter what they do to your body. Your soul is free. And one day, baby, one day that freedom gonna show itself." Lucy held them words close, kept them tucked in her heart like hidden treasure. And every night, after the work was done and the quarters fell into that heavy silence, the kind of silence that speaks loud of exhaustion and sorrow, Lucy would whisper prayers, not to the white man's God, not to Jesus in the big house. No, sir. She prayed to the old ones, to the ancestors, to the spirits her grandmother taught her about. She prayed in a language she barely remembered, words that felt ancient on her tongue, words that tasted like salt water and blood and freedom. And them spirits, they was listening. The old folks in the quarters noticed. They seen Lucy walking different, not proud. You couldn't be proud on Wycliffe Plantation without getting killed, but present. Like she was there, but also somewhere else. Like she was seeing things with more than just her eyes. "That girl touched," one elder woman named Aunt Bess whispered. "She been marked, ancestrally marked. And if you been round long enough, you know what that means. It means the spirits got plans for her. It means she ain't just another slave. She a vessel, a carrier of something bigger than herself." But Lucy didn't know that yet. She just knew she felt different. Like a storm was building inside her chest. Like thunder was gathering in her bones. Like she was waiting for something she couldn't name but could feel coming sure as sunrise. The plantation went on. Days bled into each other. Cotton picked, backs whipped, souls crushed. Same old suffering, same old bondage. Master Wycliffe counted his money. Mistress Wycliffe fanned herself on the porch. And Pike walked through them fields like the angel of death, whip coiled at his side, eyes always watching, always hunting for somebody to punish. And then one day, one cursed, terrible, fate-changing day, Lucy did something she could never take back. She looked up, not at the sky, not at the cotton. She looked at Tom Pike, looked him dead in his cold eyes when he raised his hand to strike a child who'd stumbled in the row. Little girl name of Hannah, no more than 5 years old, who'd tripped over her own feet from exhaustion. Lucy stepped forward, didn't say nothing, didn't shout, didn't threaten. She just stepped forward, put herself between that child and Pike's hand. And her eyes, Lord have mercy, her eyes. They was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that makes a man's blood run cold. Pike froze. For just a second, he froze. And in that second, something shifted. The air got heavy. The earth seemed to hold its breath. Every slave in that field felt it. A change, a crack in the order of things. And Pike, he knew it too. He felt it in his gut. Felt that this small, quiet woman just challenged him in a way he couldn't ignore. And men like Pike, they can't let that stand. Can't let a slave, and especially a woman, show defiance and walk away. His face went red, his jaw clenched tight, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and shaken with rage. You just bought yourself a world of pain, girl." Lucy said nothing, just stood there, still as stone. Eyes never leaving his. And that's when it started. That's when Lucy's fate was sealed. That's when the salt, the terrible, burning, unforgettable salt, became part of her story forever. And if you think you already heard stories of suffering, child, wait till you hear what they did to her. Now, before I tell you what happened next, before I speak the unspeakable, you gotta understand who Lucy was. Not just her name, not just her place in the quarters. You gotta know her so well. See, Lucy wasn't always quiet. Wasn't always that shadow woman who moved through the fields like mist. There was a time, brief as spring rain but real, when she laughed, when she sang, when she still believed something better was coming. She was born on Wycliffe Plantation in the year 1831, under a full moon so bright folks said it looked like daytime. Her mama, a woman named Esther, was a house servant, one of them unfortunate souls who had to smile at white folk while her own heart was dying. Her daddy, a man called Big Thomas, worked the fields and had shoulders wide as a door frame. Strong-backed man, they called him, the kind who could carry twice his weight and still keep walking. Lucy grew up knowing love, even in bondage. Her mama sang to her every night, old songs in a language Lucy didn't understand but felt in her chest like heartbeat. Her daddy would carve little wooden animals for her from scraps of firewood, hiding them under her straw mattress so the white folk wouldn't take them away. But love don't protect you from the whip. Love don't stop the auction block. Love don't keep your family together when master needs money and decides to sell your child. When Lucy was 7, just a baby really, still believing the world could be kind, her mama got sold. Sold to settle a gambling debt Master Wycliffe owed to some rich man in Savannah. Lucy watched it happen, stood there in the yard while her mama was chained, while she screamed Lucy's name over and over till her voice went hoarse, while the wagon pulled away down that long dusty road and disappeared into the trees. Lucy ran after it, ran till her little legs gave out, ran till she collapsed in the red clay dust, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Big Thomas found her there hours later, picked her up and carried her back. He didn't say nothing. What could he say? There was no comfort for that kind of pain. After that, Lucy stopped laughing. After that, the songs died in her throat. 3 years later, Big Thomas was accused of stealing food from the smokehouse. He hadn't. Everybody knew he hadn't. But Pike needed to make an example. Needed to remind folks what happened when they got too comfortable. So they tied Big Thomas to the whipping post and beat him. Beat him till the flesh hung off his back in strips. Beat him till he couldn't stand no more. And even then, they didn't stop. Lucy watched that too. She was 10 years old. Big Thomas died that night. Died calling out to God and to his ancestors, begging for mercy that never came. They buried him in the slave cemetery. Just a shallow hole with no marker, no name, nothing to say he ever existed. And Lucy went cold inside. The child in her died with her daddy. What was left was a girl who understood the world for what it truly was. A place of endless cruelty, where the powerful crush the powerless and call it order. But even then, even after losing everything, Lucy had one thing left. One person who kept her tethered to something beyond the horror. Her grandmother. Grandmother was ancient. Nobody knew exactly how old. She'd been born in Africa, in the kingdom of Dahomey, and brought across the Middle Passage as a young woman. She still carried the scars on her wrists from the iron manacles, still spoke with an accent that marked her as saltwater. One of them who came directly from the ships, who remembered the homeland. Grandmother didn't work the fields no more. She was too old, too frail. Master Wycliffe let her stay in the quarters out of some twisted sense of charity, and she spent her days sitting outside her cabin, eyes half closed, humming songs in languages the white folk couldn't name. But the old woman wasn't weak. No, sir, she was a root doctor, a conjure woman, one of them who knew the secrets of herbs and roots, who could call on spirits, who understood the invisible world that moved alongside the visible one. And she saw something in Lucy, saw it clear as day. "Come here, child," she'd say, and Lucy would sit at her feet like she used to do when she was small. Grandmother would run her gnarled fingers through Lucy's hair and speak low, speak in that voice that sounded like wind through old trees. "You carry storm inside you, Lucy girl. You got thunder in your bones and lightning in your blood. The ancestors chose you before you was even born, you hear me? They'd have chose you." Lucy didn't understand she was just a slave. Just another suffering soul in a world full of suffering souls. What was special about her? But grandmother insisted. She taught Lucy things, secret things, how to read signs in nature, the way birds flew, the way shadows fell, the way the wind changed before rain. She taught her about roots, which ones healed, which ones harmed, which ones opened doors between worlds. She taught her prayers in the old language, words that tasted like salt and iron on the tongue. "When the time comes," grandmother said, eyes suddenly sharp, suddenly seeing something far away. "When the suffering gets too great and you think you can't bear no more, remember who you are, remember your blood, remember your ancestors. And when you call on them, child, they will answer." Lucy held them words like a promise, like a secret weapon tucked inside her heart. Grandmother died when Lucy was 15. Died peaceful in her sleep, which was a mercy rare as gold in them days. They buried her next to Big Thomas, and Lucy stood at the grave with tears running down her face, feeling like the last thread connecting her to anything good had just been cut. But she wasn't alone. Not really. 'Cause grandmother's spirit stayed close. Lucy could feel it. Could feel the old woman watching over her, guiding her, waiting for the moment when Lucy would need her most. And that moment, Lord Jesus, that moment was coming. In the years that followed, Lucy became known in the quarters as a pitiful soul, a woman broken by loss, silent and submissive. The other slaves pitied her. The white folk ignored her. She was invisible, forgotten. But deep inside, where no overseer's whip could reach, where no master's word could touch, Lucy was building a wall of iron around her heart, building a fire that grew hotter every day, building a rage so pure, so righteous, so ancient, that it connected her to every enslaved soul who'd ever lived, who'd ever suffered, who'd ever died in chains. She prayed every night, not for salvation, not for freedom. She prayed for deep strength, for endurance, for the power to survive long enough to see justice done. And the ancestors heard her. They was watching. They was waiting. All they needed was the right moment. And on that terrible day when Lucy stepped between Pike and that child, when she looked into his cold eyes with a calmness that shook him to his core, the ancestors whispered, "Now." The storm inside Lucy was about to break loose. The thunder in her bones was about to sound. The lightning in her blood was about to strike. And Jonathan Pike, cruel, wicked, damned man that he was about to learn what happens when you push a woman too far, when you mistake silence for weakness, when you forget that even the smallest ember, if fanned long enough, can become an inferno. Lucy was small. Lucy was quiet. But Lucy carried a power Pike couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't stop. And he was about to find out on her, the hard way. Now listen here, children, 'cause what I'm about to tell you is the kind of truth that makes grown men weep and women clutch their hearts. This here is the day everything changed. The day the quiet ended. The day Lucy's fate was sealed with blood and rage. It was a Tuesday in July, year of our Lord 1851. Heat so thick you could cut it with a knife. That burning sun hung in the sky like the eye of God himself, watching everything, judging everything, but not stopping nothing. The cotton fields stretched out endless, white bowls ready for picking, and the slaves moved through them rows like ghosts, bent double, fingers bleeding, backs breaking under the weight of bondage. Pike was in one of his moods that day. You could tell by the way he walked. Slow, deliberate, like a snake sliding through grass looking for something to strike. He carried that whip coiled at his side, leather handle worn smooth from years of use, and his eyes, Lord have mercy, his eyes was cold as January frost. He was hunting, not for runways, not for thieves. He was hunting for an excuse. Any excuse to remind folks who held the power on Wycliffe Plantation. The field hands knew. They could feel it in their bones the way animals feel a storm coming. They kept their heads down lower than usual, moved faster, worked harder, hoping, praying that Pike's attention would pass them by. Old folks say when evil walks among you, you gotta make yourself small, make yourself invisible, 'cause evil feeds on attention like fire feeds on wood. But there was one person Pike couldn't ignore that day. Little Hannah, sweet child, no more than 5 years old, daughter of a woman named Rose who worked in the big house kitchen. Hannah was too young to be in the fields, but Master Wycliffe didn't care about ages. If you could walk, you could work. That was the law of the plantation. Poor little thing was struggling. Her hands was too small to pull them cotton bolls proper, and she kept dropping more than she picked. Her sack, which should have been half full by midday, was nearly empty. And she was tired, Lord Jesus, so tired. Her little legs kept giving out and she'd stumble, catch herself, keep moving, but it was clear she was about to collapse. Pike saw it, and he smiled. That terrible smile that didn't reach his eyes. The smile of a man who found his prey. He walked over slow, boots crushing the red clay beneath him, whip swinging loose in his hand. The other slaves nearby felt the shift in the air, that heavy, suffocating dread that comes before violence. They didn't look up, couldn't look up. To witness was to risk becoming the next victim. But Lucy saw. Lucy was working 3 rows over, and she saw Pike coming like the angel of death himself. She saw little Hannah's eyes go wide with terror, saw the child freeze like a rabbit cornered by a wolf. And something inside Lucy, something old and fierce and unbreakable, shifted. Pike reached Hannah and grabbed her by the arm, yanking her up off the ground so hard her feet left the earth. "You lazy little wretch," he snarled, voice full of venom. "You think you can slack off on my watch? You think I won't notice?" Hannah started crying, that high-pitched wail of a terrified child who don't understand why the world is so cruel. "Please, sir," she sobbed. I's trying real hard." "Shut your mouth," Pike roared, and he raised his hand high, ready to bring it down across her face with the kind of force that could break bones. And that's when Lucy moved. She dropped her sack, didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. Crossed them 3 rows faster than lightning strikes ground, and before Pike's hand could connect with Hannah's cheek, Lucy was there. Right there. Between them, her body a shield, her eyes locked on Pike's. Time seemed to stop, children. The whole field went silent. Not a sound but the wind rustling through the cotton and the distant cry of a crow. Every slave in that field felt it. The shift, the break, the moment when the natural order got challenged. Pike's hand stopped midair. His face went from red to white to red again. He stared at Lucy like he couldn't believe what just happened. Like he was seeing a ghost. A slave, a woman slave, had just blocked him, had just stepped in his way, had just defied him in front of everybody. For a long, terrible moment, nobody breathed. Lucy didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. They was calm but fierce, like deep water that looks peaceful on the surface but hides strong currents underneath. She stood there, barely 5 feet tall, thin as a reed from years of poor rations. But in that moment she looked like a queen, like royalty, like something that couldn't be broken no matter how hard you tried. Pike's jaw clenched so tight you could hear his teeth grinding. His free hand went to the whip at his side, fingers wrapping round the handle till his knuckles went white. The rage in him was visible, a living, breathing thing that filled the air with violence. "You," he whispered, voice shaking with fury. "You dare?" Lucy said nothing, just held his gaze, steady, unmoving. Hannah slipped from Pike's grip and ran, disappearing into the rows of cotton like a scared rabbit finding its burrow. And that made it worse, made Pike's humiliation complete. Not only had Lucy defied him, but his prey had escaped. He took a step toward Lucy, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Lucy moved. Not backward, forward. One small step, but it was enough. Enough to say, "I ain't running. I ain't backing down. Do what you gonna do." The other slaves watched from the corners of their eyes, hearts pounding, knowing they was witnessing something that would be talked about for generations. This was the kind of moment that changed everything. The kind of moment that got carved into memory and passed down in whispers. Pike's voice, when it finally came, was low and cold as a grave. You just bought yourself a world of pain, girl. You hear me? A world of pain. Lucy didn't flinch, didn't blink. Just stood there like she was made of stone, like she'd already accepted whatever was coming and decided it was worth it. Her lips moved, just barely, and them who was close enough swear they heard her whisper something in a language that wasn't English, something old. Something that made the air feel heavier, made the earth beneath their feet seem to pulse with ancient rhythm. Pike heard it too, and for just a second, just a flicker, fear crossed his face. Real fear, the kind that comes from deep in the gut when you realize you might have just made a terrible mistake. But he was too proud to back down, too cruel to show mercy, too wicked to let a slave woman make him look weak. "Get back to work," he said finally, voice tight. "All of you, now!" The slaves scattered like leaves in wind, returning to their rows, heads down, hands moving fast. But they knew, they all knew. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Pike turned and walked away, but his back was stiff, his shoulders tense. He was already planning, already deciding what kind of punishment would be severe enough to break Lucy's spirit, to restore his authority, to make an example so terrible that no slave would ever dare defy him again. And Lucy went back to her row, picked up her sack, started pulling cotton like nothing had happened. But her hands was shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Something that felt like electricity running through her veins. Like her ancestors was there beside her, speaking through her, moving through her. That night, back in the quarters, the talk was hushed but urgent. Folks gathered in small groups, whispering about what they'd seen. Some said Lucy was brave, others said she was foolish. A few said she was touched by spirits, that she'd been marked for something bigger than herself. Old Aunt Bess, the eldest woman in the quarters, a root worker who knew things, sat outside her cabin watching Lucy's door. When Lucy finally emerged to fetch water from the well, Aunt Bess called out to her. "Child," she said, voice heavy with knowing, "you done started something today, something that can't be stopped now. The ancestors is with you, but so is danger. You understand?" Lucy nodded slowly. "I understand." "Good," Aunt Bess said. "Then you remember this. When the suffering comes, and it's coming, child, it's coming heavy, you hold on to who you are. You hold on to your blood. You hold on to your spirit, 'cause that's all they can't take from you." Lucy looked at the old woman, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Not a happy smile, a knowing smile. The smile of someone who'd just accepted their destiny. "I remember, Auntie," she said softly. "I remember everything." And as she walked back to her cabin, the moon hung low and red in the sky, and the wind carried the scent of something burning far away. Pike was coming, the punishment was coming, and Lucy was ready. Children, what I'm about to tell you now, this is where the story gets dark. Darker than a moonless night in the deep woods. Darker than the hold of a slave ship crossing the Middle Passage. This is where Lucy's suffering truly began, and where her spirit was tested like gold in fire. 2 days passed after the confrontation in the cotton field. 2 days of terrible, heavy silence. Pike didn't speak to Lucy, didn't even look at her. But everybody on Wycliffe Plantation knew something was coming. You could feel it in the air, thick and oppressive like the calm before a hurricane. The slaves moved through their work with dread in their hearts, whispering prayers under their breath, knowing that when Pike's punishment finally came, it would be something awful. Pike was a patient man when it came to cruelty. He understood that anticipation was its own kind of torture. Let a person wait, let them imagine all the terrible things that might happen, and by the time the actual punishment came, their spirit was already half broken. It was a lesson he'd learned from years of controlling human beings like they was animals. Fear, he believed. was more powerful than the whip itself. On the third day, a Friday morning when the sun rose red as blood, Pike made his move. He came to the quarters before dawn, before the wake-up bell, before the slaves had even stirred from their straw mattresses. He brought 4 men with him, 2 white paddy rollers from town, and 2 slave drivers. Black men forced to do the master's dirty work, men with eyes full of shame but bodies trained to obey. They carried torches that cast long, dancing shadows across the cabin walls, and the sight of them flames made folks' blood run cold. Pike stopped in front of Lucy's cabin and kicked the door open with his boot. The sound was like thunder in the pre-dawn quiet. "Get up," he commanded, voice flat and cold. "Now." Lucy was already awake. She'd known this moment was coming, had spent the past 2 nights praying to her ancestors, preparing her spirit for whatever lay ahead. She rose from her mattress, just a pile of old burlap stuffed with corn husks, and stood before Pike with her head high, her eyes clear. She wore the same ragged dress she always wore, patched 100 times, stained with sweat and red clay. Her feet was bare, cracked and calloused from years of walking on hard ground. But there was something in her bearing, something in the way she carried herself, that made her look dignified despite the circumstances. Pike stared at her with hatred so pure it was almost admiration. He'd broken countless slaves in his years as overseer, but this one was different. She didn't cower, didn't beg, just stood there like she was waiting for him to do his worst. "Bring her," Pike said to the drivers. They grabbed Lucy by the arms, rough hands that nonetheless tried to be gentle, 'cause even men forced to commit cruelty still carry humanity somewhere deep inside, and dragged her out into the yard. By now, the other slaves was emerging from their cabins, faces etched with sorrow and fear. They knew what was about to happen. They'd seen it before. The whipping post. It stood in the center of the quarters, a thick wooden pole sunk deep into the ground, worn smooth from years of use, dark with old bloodstains that no amount of rain could wash away. It was a monument to suffering, a reminder of what happened to them who stepped out of line. Some folks said at night you could hear the ghosts of all them who'd been whipped there, their cries echoing in the wind. The paddy rollers tied Lucy to the post, stretching her arms above her head and binding her wrists with rough hemp rope that bit into her flesh. They ripped her dress down to her waist, exposing her back, smooth, dark skin that bore no scars yet, 'cause Lucy had never been whipped before. She'd been invisible for so long, had kept her head down and her mouth shut, that this was her first time at the post. Pike walked around her slow like a preacher inspecting his congregation, and he called out in a loud voice for all to hear, "Let this be a lesson. Let every slave on this plantation understand. Defiance will not be tolerated. When you challenge my authority, you challenge the natural order of things, and the natural order must be maintained." He uncoiled his whip, a long, thick piece of braided leather with metal tips woven into the ends, designed to cut flesh deep. It made a singing sound as it moved through the air, a terrible music that made folks' stomachs turn. 20 lashes, Pike announced, and if she screams, we'll add 10 more. Lucy closed her eyes. She could feel her ancestors gathering round her, could feel her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. In her mind, she repeated the old prayers, the ancient words that connected her to generations of sufferance and survival. She made herself a promise right then. She would not give Pike the satisfaction of hearing her pain. The first lash came down like thunder. The sound cracked through the morning air, followed by the collective gasp of every slave watching. Lucy's body jerked forward against the post, her muscles tightening, her breath catching in her throat. But no sound came from her lips, not even a whimper. Pike paused, surprised. He'd expected a scream. They always screamed on the first lash. He struck again, harder. The whip bit deep into Lucy's flesh, opening a long gash that immediately began bleeding. The blood ran down her back in thick rivulets, staining her torn dress, dripping onto the hard-packed earth below. Still, Lucy made no sound. By the 5th lash, Pike was breathing hard, frustrated by Lucy's silence. He was putting all his strength into each blow, tearing her back to ribbons, but she refused to give him what he wanted. Her body trembled with the effort of holding back. Her hands clenched into fists so tight her fingernails drew blood from her palms, but her lips stayed sealed. The slaves watching was crying, silent tears streaming down their faces, hearts breaking for Lucy but unable to do nothing to stop it. Some of the women turned away, unable to bear the sight. The men stood with jaws clenched, anger and helplessness warring inside them, knowing that to intervene would mean their own death. By the 10th lash, Lucy's back was a mass of torn flesh and blood. The skin hung in strips, exposing muscle and bone beneath. It was a sight so terrible that even one of the paddy rollers, a young white man who'd probably never seen such savagery up close, turned pale and looked away. But Lucy, Lord have mercy, Lucy was somewhere else. She'd left her body, traveled to a place where pain couldn't reach. She was with her ancestors, walking in green fields she'd never seen but somehow remembered. She was with her grandmother, who held her hand and whispered, "Hold on, child, hold on. This ain't the end. This is just the beginning." By the 15th lash, Pike was raging. He'd never had a slave resist like this. Never had someone deny him the sound of their suffering. It felt like Lucy was mocking him, even as her body was being destroyed. "Scream, damn you!" he shouted, bringing the whip down with renewed fury. "Scream!" But Lucy's lips only moved in silent prayer. Words in a language Pike couldn't understand, couldn't silence, couldn't control. When the 20th lash finally fell, Pike threw the whip down in disgust. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his face twisted with rage and something else. Something that might have been fear. 'Cause if he couldn't break this woman with 20 lashes, what did that say about his power? What did that say about his authority? Lucy hung limp against the post, barely conscious, her back a ruin of torn flesh and exposed bone. Blood pooled beneath her, sinking into the thirsty earth. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but still. She hadn't screamed. Pike stared at her for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but full of dark promise. "Cut her down. Take her to the infirmary. Let her wounds fester for 3 days. And on the 4th day," he paused, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "On the 4th day, we begin the real punishment." The slaves gasped. The real punishment? If 20 lashes wasn't the punishment, what could possibly be worse? Pike leaned close to Lucy's ear, speaking so only she could hear. "I'm gonna break you, girl. Gonna break you in ways you can't even imagine. And before I'm done, you're gonna beg me to kill you." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Lucy tied to the post, bleeding and broken, but somehow still undefeated. The slave drivers cut her down, and she collapsed into their arms like a rag doll. They carried her to the infirmary, a small, dark cabin where sick and injured slaves was kept, and laid her face down on a wooden pallet. An old woman named Sister Ruth, who served as the plantation's healer, came with rags and water, but when she saw Lucy's back, she wept. "Lord Jesus," Sister Ruth whispered, "what they done to you, child?" Lucy's eyes opened, just barely, and she looked at Sister Ruth with a gaze so calm, so clear, it sent chills down the old woman's spine. "They think they breaking me," Lucy whispered, voice hoarse but steady. "But they just making me stronger." And as Sister Ruth cleaned the wounds as best she could, as she whispered prayers over Lucy's tortured body, as the sun rose higher in the sky and bathed the plantation in merciless light, Lucy smiled, because she knew something Pike didn't know. She knew that suffering has a limit, but spirit is infinite. And her spirit, forged in the fires of loss and tempered by ancestral wisdom, was just beginning to awaken. Sweet Jesus. What I'm about to tell you now, children, this is where Lucy's name was born, where the legend started, where suffering became something so terrible, so unspeakable, that even the telling of it makes my old bones ache with remembered pain. 3 days passed. 3 days where Lucy lay face down in that dark infirmary, her back a mass of torn flesh and dried blood. Sister Ruth did what she could, applied poultices of yarrow and comfrey, whispered prayers over the wounds, changed the bloody rags every few hours. But infection was setting in. The flesh around the lash marks was turning red and angry, swollen with poison. Fever burned through Lucy's body like wildfire, making her drift in and out of consciousness, muttering words in that old language, calling out to ancestors and spirits. The other slaves came when they could, sneaking in after the workday ended, bringing what little comfort they had to offer. A cup of water, a kind word, a gentle touch on Lucy's hand. They looked at her with a mixture of pity and awe, 'cause word had spread through the quarters about how she never screamed, how she took 20 lashes without giving Pike the satisfaction of hearing her pain. She touched by the ancestors, folks whispered. Ain't no natural woman could endure that silent. But on the morning of the 4th day, just like Pike promised, everything changed. He came at dawn again, always at dawn, 'cause that's when hope is most fragile, when the night's protection is lifted but the day's strength ain't yet arrived. He brought the same men with him, plus 2 more slaves carrying something heavy wrapped in burlap. When they set it down, you could hear the sound of something granular shifting inside, like sand or gravel. Pike stood in the doorway of the infirmary, blocking out the early morning light, and when he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes before a storm. Bring her out. Sister Ruth, who'd been dozing in a chair beside Lucy's pallet, jolted awake. When she saw Pike and understood what was about to happen, her old face crumpled with grief. "Master Pike, sir," she said, voice shaken. "She ain't healed yet. Her back still—" "I didn't ask for your opinion, old woman," Pike cut her off. "I said bring her out." The slave drivers moved past Sister Ruth and lifted Lucy from the pallet. She was barely conscious, weakened by fever and pain, her body light as a child's from 3 days without proper food. They carried her out into the yard where the other slaves was already gathered, not by choice, but by order. Pike wanted witnesses, wanted everyone to see what happened to them who defied him. They tied Lucy to the whipping post again, but this time they left her dress on. This time the punishment wasn't about the whip. It was about something far worse. Pike gestured to the burlap sacks. "Open them." When the slaves unwrapped the sacks, a collective gasp went through the crowd. Inside was salt, barrels and barrels of coarse, rough salt, the kind used for curing meat and preserving hides. In the early morning light, it looked almost beautiful, white crystals catching the sun like snow. But everyone there knew what it was for, knew what Pike intended to do. "Now listen here," Pike announced, his voice carrying across the silent yard. "This slave thought she could challenge my authority, thought she could stand against me and walk away with just a whipping. But I'm here to teach a lesson that will echo through this plantation for generations." He paused, letting his words sink in. "For the next 40 days, 40 days, you hear me? This woman's wounds will be treated with salt. Every morning at dawn, we will scrub her back with coarse salt until she understands the price of defiance, until she begs for mercy, until she remembers her place. 40 days, Lord have mercy. 40 days of salt in open wounds." The slaves stood frozen, unable to believe what they was hearing. Even by plantation standards, even in a world built on cruelty, this was monstrous. This was beyond punishment. This was torture designed to destroy not just the body, but the soul itself. Pike turned to 2 young slaves, boys barely 16 years old, strong-backed but still with some softness in their faces. "You 2, come here." The boys approached, trembling, knowing what was being asked of them but unable to refuse. "Take handfuls of that salt," Pike commanded, "and scrub her wounds. Don't be gentle. I want to hear her scream." The boys looked at each other, eyes filled with horror. To refuse meant their own death. To obey meant participating in Lucy's torture. There was no good choice. Just degrees of damnation. With shaking hands, they scooped up handfuls of the coarse salt. The crystals were rough, sharp-edged, made for preserving meat, not for human skin. As they approached Lucy, one of the boys was crying openly, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Lucy. "I'm so sorry." Lucy's head lifted slightly. Her eyes, fever bright but still clear, still fierce, met his. And in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Ain't your fault, child. Do what you gotta do. The ancestors know your heart." The boy nodded, choking on his own grief, and then he pressed the salt into Lucy's torn back. The pain was immediate and absolute, like liquid fire poured directly into her veins, like 1,000 knives cutting into her flesh all at once, like her body was being consumed from the inside out. The salt crystals scraped against exposed muscle and bone, grinding into the wounds, setting every nerve ending ablaze with agony so intense it bordered on inhuman. Lucy's body went rigid, her hands clenched around the ropes binding her wrists. Her teeth bit down on her lower lip so hard it bled. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, demanding release, demanding sound, demanding acknowledgement of the pain. But Lucy, sweet Jesus, Lucy held on. The boys worked with tears streaming down their faces, following Pike's orders but hating every second of it. They scrubbed the salt into every lash mark, every open wound, grinding the crystals deep into Lucy's flesh. The salt mixed with blood, creating a burning paste that seeped into places even the whip hadn't reached. Pike watched with satisfaction, waiting for the scream, waiting for Lucy to break, waiting for vindication of his power. But Lucy refused him. Even as her body trembled with the effort, even as sweat poured down her face and her breath came in ragged gasps, even as the pain reached levels that should have made her pass out, she did not scream. Instead, she prayed. Her lips moved in silent incantation, forming words older than the plantation, older than slavery, older than America itself. Words her grandmother had taught her, words that called on powers Pike couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't control. And something strange happened. The other slaves felt it, a shift in the air, a presence gathering, like the ancestors themselves was drawing near, wrapping Lucy in invisible arms, lending her their strength across the veil between worlds. Old Aunt Bess, standing in the crowd, felt it strongest. She closed her eyes and whispered her own prayer, recognizing what was happening. Lucy wasn't just enduring the pain. She was transforming it, taking the suffering and alchemizing it into something else, something powerful, something sacred, something dangerous. When the boys finally finished, their hands red with Lucy's blood, their souls wounded by what they'd been forced to do, Pike stood there staring at Lucy with an expression that mixed rage and confusion. She still hung from the post, body shaking, breath shallow, but silent, unbroken. "Take her down," Pike said finally, voice tight. "Tomorrow morning we do it again." They cut Lucy loose and she collapsed immediately, caught by the boys who'd just tortured her. They carried her back to the infirmary, both of them sobbing now, whispering apologies Lucy couldn't hear anymore because she'd finally passed out. Not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding her pain inside. Sister Ruth was waiting, and when she saw Lucy's back, salt crystals still embedded in the wounds, the flesh angry and swollen and burning, she wept like she'd never wept before. "Lord Jesus," she cried. "How is she supposed to survive this? 40 days of this? Nobody can survive 40 days of this." But even as she spoke, even as she tried to wash the salt from Lucy's wounds with water and gentle hands, she noticed something that made her pause. Lucy's breathing was steady, too steady for someone who'd just endured such torture, and her face, though marked with pain, held a strange peace, like she'd gone somewhere else, somewhere beyond suffering. "The ancestors with her," Aunt Bess said from the doorway, having followed the boys back. "They carrying her through. This ain't about survival anymore, Sister Ruth. This about something bigger, something we can't even understand yet." And as the sun rose higher and Lucy lay unconscious on that wooden pallet, her back burning with salt and fire, somewhere deep in the slave quarters, a rumor began to spread. Lucy didn't scream. On the first day of the salt, she didn't scream. And folks began to wonder, What kind of woman can endure such suffering in silence? What kind of power does she carry? And what will happen when that power finally breaks free? Now, children, I need you to understand something about suffering. Real suffering. The kind that tests a soul down to its very foundation. There's a place pain can take you where the body and spirit separate, where the flesh screams, but the soul stands firm, where torture becomes transformation. And that's where Lucy lived for 40 days and 40 nights. That's where she became something more than human. That's where she became legend. Days passed like slow torture itself. Each morning at dawn, Pike came with his men and his barrels of salt. Each morning, Lucy was dragged from the infirmary, where Sister Ruth could barely keep her alive through the nights, and tied to that cursed post. Each morning, them same two boys, now hollow-eyed and soul-sick from their forced participation, would take handfuls of coarse salt and scrub Lucy's wounds. By day 5, Lucy's back was no longer recognizable as human flesh. It was raw meat, exposed muscle, glimpses of bone white beneath rivers of blood and infection. The salt had eaten away at the tissue, creating deep craters in her skin where the wounds festered despite Sister Ruth's desperate attempts to clean them. The pain should have killed her. The infection should have taken her. But Lucy kept breathing. By day 10, Pike was frustrated. He'd expected Lucy to break by now. Expected her to scream, to beg, to plead for mercy like every other slave he'd ever tortured. But instead, Lucy had gone somewhere else entirely. She didn't fight the ropes anymore. Didn't tense up when the salt touched her wounds. She just endured. Silent as a grave, present but not present, her eyes fixed on some distant point only she could see. The slaves watching, forced to witness every morning, began to change. At first they'd looked away in horror and pity, but as the days wore on, as Lucy continued to survive what should have killed her, something shifted. They started to see her differently, not as a victim, not as a broken woman, but as something sacred, something powerful, a living testimony to the strength of their people, to the unbreakable nature of the African spirit. She walking with the ancestors, Aunt Bess told folks in hushed tones at night. Her body here, but her soul somewhere else. Somewhere them white folks can't touch. Somewhere the salt can't reach. Old folks in the quarters started bringing offerings. Little things they could spare without being caught. A scrap of cloth, a small stone from the river, a sprig of yarrow. They'd leave them outside the infirmary door, creating a small shrine without even realizing it. These weren't Christian offerings. These was something older. Something from before the ships, before the chains, before the plantation. This was Africa remembering itself. By day 15, even Pike's men was unsettled. The two boys forced to apply the salt could barely function anymore. They worked the fields like ghosts, jumped at shadows, woke up screaming in the night. One of them, a boy named Samuel, sweet-natured and soft-spoken, stopped eating entirely. Just stared at his hands like he could still see Lucy's blood on them. "I can't do it no more," he whispered to his mama one night. "I can't keep hurting her. Every time I touch that salt to her skin, I feel like I'm killing my own soul." His mama held him while he cried, knowing there was nothing she could do, no way to save him from the terrible choice Pike had forced on him. "Pray, baby," she told him. "Pray for forgiveness. Pray that Miss Lucy knows it ain't your fault. Pray that God sees your heart." But Samuel wasn't sure he believed in the white man's God anymore. How could a just God allow such suffering? How could a loving God demand he torture an innocent woman to save his own life? Lucy, meanwhile, was changing. Not just her body, though that was being destroyed day by day, but something deeper. Folks who'd known her all her life said she looked different now. Her eyes, when she bothered to focus them on the present world, held depths that hadn't been there before. Ancient depths. When she spoke, which was rare, her voice carried weight, like each word was carved from stone. Sister Ruth saw it too. She'd been tending Lucy's wounds every night, trying to wash away the day's salt, applying what little healing salve she could make from herbs gathered in secret. And one night, as she worked, Lucy's eyes opened and fixed on her with such clarity, it made the old woman's breath catch. "Don't weep for me, sister," Lucy said, voice clear despite the fever that raged through her body. "This ain't breaking me. This making me." "Child, I don't understand," Sister Ruth whispered. "How you still alive? How you still sane? No human being should be able to endure what you enduring." Lucy smiled then, a small, knowing smile that held more wisdom than her years should have allowed. "I ain't enduring it alone. Every ancestor who died in chains is here with me. Every mother who lost her baby at auction. Every man whipped to death in these fields. They all here, sister, and they all lending me their strength." Sister Ruth felt chills run down her spine. "You talking to them? The spirits?" "Every night," Lucy confirmed. "They come to me in dreams, show me things, teach me things. My grandmother is here most of all. She tells me this suffering got purpose, that I'm being prepared for something, that when the time comes I'll know what to do." "What you gonna do, child?" Lucy's eyes went distant again, seeing something beyond the cabin walls, beyond the plantation, beyond the present moment. "Justice," she whispered. "I'm gonna bring justice." By day 20, Pike was no longer satisfied with just the morning ritual. He started coming twice a day, morning and evening, doubling Lucy's torture. The salt treatment was taking longer now because there was barely any skin left to scrub, just raw, weeping flesh that burned at the slightest touch. But still, Lucy didn't break, didn't scream, didn't beg. The plantation was changing because of it. Slaves who'd been docile for years started showing small signs of resistance. A tool left in the wrong place. Work done too slowly to be productive, but too quickly to be called deliberate sabotage. Songs sung in the fields that carried double meanings. Words of suffering, but also words of defiance. Master Wycliffe noticed, called Pike into his office one evening, poured them both whiskey, and spoke plain. "This punishment of yours, it's not having the effect you wanted. The slaves aren't more obedient, they're getting bolder. And that woman, they're starting to see her as some kind of martyr, some kind of saint." Pike's jaw clenched. "Give me time. I'll break her." "You've had 20 days, Master Wycliffe said coldly. "How much time do you need? And what good is a broken slave anyway? She can't work, can't be sold. At this point, she's just costing me money, food, medical attention, the time wasted on these daily spectacles." "She disrespected me in front of everyone," Pike said, voice low and dangerous. "If I let that stand, if I let her win, every slave on this plantation will think they can do the same. I have to break her, have to." Master Wycliffe studied his overseer with cold calculation. "Then break her quickly. You have 20 more days, the 40 you promised. But if she's still standing at the end of it, if she survives with her spirit intact, then you've failed. And I'll have to reconsider your position here." That threat hung in the air like smoke. Pike left the big house with murder in his heart and desperation eating at his gut. He'd built his reputation on being able to control slaves through fear. If Lucy defeated him, if she endured all 40 days without breaking, then everything he'd built would crumble. He couldn't let that happen. Wouldn't let that happen. By day 25, Lucy's body was barely holding together. Infection raged through her system. Fever burned so hot her skin felt like fire to the touch. She drifted in and out of consciousness, unable to tell where the physical world ended and the spirit world began. Sister Ruth had to force water between her lips just to keep her alive. But her spirit was growing stronger, brighter, more focused. The ancestors spoke to her constantly now, showed her visions of things to come, showed her the path she needed to walk, and at the center of every vision was fire, and salt, and blood, and a reckoning that would shake the foundations of Wycliffe Plantation. "Soon," her grandmother's voice whispered in her ear. "Soon, child. Hold on just a little longer. The time is almost here." Lucy smiled in her fever dreams, because she understood now. understood that this suffering wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Every day of torture was forging her into something new, something fierce, something unstoppable. The salt was destroying her flesh, but it was also purifying her spirit, burning away everything weak, everything fearful, everything human that could be controlled. What was left was something else entirely, something ancient and powerful, something the white men had tried to beat out of their slaves but could never fully kill. What was left was Africa, was fury, was idol justice Gusir waiting to be unleashed. And Pike, poor, stupid, cruel Pike, he had no idea what he'd created. By trying to break Lucy, he'd made her unbreakable. By trying to destroy her spirit, he'd set it free. And when that spirit finally moved, when it finally struck, the whole plantation would burn. Listen here now, children, because what I'm about to tell you is when things started getting truly strange. When the line between this world and the next got so thin you could almost see through it. When Lucy stopped being just a woman enduring torture and became something else, a bridge between the living and the dead, a vessel for powers older than memory. It was day 30. 30 mornings of salt scrubbed into torn flesh. 30 days of suffering that should have killed her 10 times over. Lucy's body was a ruin, barely recognizable as human anymore. Her back was a landscape of deep craters and exposed bone, flesh hanging in strips, skin blackened with infection and crusted with salt that had become part of her very being. She'd lost so much weight that her bones showed through her skin like tree branches in winter. Her eyes had sunken deep into her skull, ringed with dark circles that made her look ancient. But them eyes, Lord have mercy, them eyes was alive, more alive than they'd ever been. Pike came that morning like always, with his barrels of salt and his 2 broken boys and his determination to finally break this woman who defied everything he understood about power and control. But when he arrived at the infirmary to collect Lucy, he found something that made him stop cold. Lucy was sitting up. She shouldn't have been able to sit up. Shouldn't have been able to move at all after what she'd endured. But there she was, back straight despite the agony it must have caused, eyes open and fixed on the doorway like she'd been waiting for him. And she was humming. A low, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest, wordless but somehow full of meaning. Sister Ruth stood in the corner, eyes wide with wonder and fear. "She'd been like that since before sunrise," the old woman whispered. "Sitting up, humming them old songs, talking to folks that ain't there." Pike felt something cold slide down his spine. Superstition, he told himself. Ignorant slave superstition. But even as he thought it, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air in the infirmary felt different, heavier, charged with invisible electricity. "Bring her," he commanded, but his voice didn't carry its usual authority. When the boys approached Lucy, she turned her gaze to them, and they both stopped dead. Later, they'd try to explain what they saw in her eyes, but words failed them. It was like looking into deep water, like staring into a well with no bottom, like seeing 1,000 souls looking back at you all at once. "It's all right, children," Lucy said, and her voice, though weak from 30 days of torture, carried strange power. "Do what you gotta do. The ancestors understand your burden. They forgive you." One of the boys, Samuel, the one who'd stopped eating, the one who'd been slowly dying inside from guilt, burst into tears. "Miss Lucy," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Lucy reached out with a hand that was little more than skin and bone, touched his face gently. "I know, baby, I know. But this ain't about you, this ain't even about him." She nodded toward Pike. "This about something bigger. Something that's been building since the first chains was put on our people. And it's almost time." Pike didn't understand her words, but they filled him with dread anyway. "Enough talk," he snapped. "Get her to the post." They tied Lucy up again. Had to be more careful now because her wrists was so thin the ropes might cut right through to bone, and prepared for the daily ritual. But something was different this time. Lucy's eyes stayed open throughout, She didn't retreat into herself like usual. Instead, she seemed hyper-present, aware of everything and everyone around her. As the boys approached with handfuls of salt, Lucy began to speak. Not to them, not to Pike, to the air itself, to the empty spaces between people, to presences only she could see. "Yes, grandmother," she said clearly. "I hear you. I understand." The slaves watching felt chills run through their bodies. Pike's hand went to the pistol at his belt, an unconscious gesture of fear. "They hear," Lucy continued, eyes tracking something invisible moving through the crowd. "All of them. Every soul that died in these fields. Every mother that lost a child. Every man broken on this post. They all hear now, bearing witness." Sister Ruth whispered prayers under her breath. Aunt Bess nodded slowly, seeing what Lucy saw, or at least believing in it completely. When the salt touched Lucy's wounds that morning, something impossible happened. She didn't tense, didn't gasp, didn't even flinch. Instead, she smiled. A small, peaceful smile that had no business being on the face of someone experiencing such agony. And she kept talking, kept conversing with the invisible presences surrounding her. "The time is near," she said in that strange, distant voice. "You right, ancestors, the suffering almost done. And when it ends, when the 40th day comes, justice gonna flow like river water, gonna wash everything clean." Pike felt genuine fear for the first time in his life. This wasn't natural. This wasn't right. Lucy should be dead, should be broken, should be begging for mercy. Instead, she was prophesying like some kind of priestess, speaking of justice and reckoning with the calm certainty of someone who'd seen the future. "Shut up," Pike said, voice shaking slightly. "Shut your mouth, girl." Lucy's eyes swung to him, and when they locked on his face, Pike actually took a step backward. Because in that moment, Lucy wasn't looking at him with a slave's deference or even a victim's hatred. She was looking at him with pity, like she could see something about his future that he couldn't, like she already knew how this story ended. "You scared," Lucy observed, and it wasn't a question. "You should be, 'cause you done crossed a line you can't uncross. You took suffering and made it sacred, took torture and made it transformation, and now..." She paused, smile widening slightly. "Now you're gonna reap what you sowed." "I said shut up," Pike roared, and he grabbed the whip from his belt, bringing it down across Lucy's chest. A wild, desperate blow meant to restore his sense of control. Blood bloomed across Lucy's already ruined body, but she didn't stop smiling, didn't stop staring at him with those knowing eyes. 10 more days, she whispered. "Then you gonna understand. Then everybody gonna understand." Pike hit her again, and again, and again. Lost all composure, all calculated cruelty, just striking out in fear and rage and confusion. But Lucy took every blow without sound, without tears, without breaking that terrible, peaceful smile. The slaves watching was terrified, but also transfixed. They'd never seen anything like this. Never seen someone take such punishment while simultaneously seeming above it, beyond it, untouched by it in some fundamental way. When Pike finally exhausted himself, breathing hard and sweating despite the cool morning air, he looked at Lucy with something approaching desperation. "What are you?" he demanded. Lucy's head tilted slightly like she was listening to voices he couldn't hear. Then she spoke, and her voice carried echoes of countless others, like a chorus speaking through her mouth. "I am the salt you put in my wounds. I am the tears my people cried. I am the blood this ground drank. I am the rage that's been building since the first ship crossed the Atlantic. I am memory. I am reckoning. I am justice coming due." The air felt electric. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky was clear. Birds that had been singing went suddenly silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Pike stepped back, face pale. For the first time since this ordeal began, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. If by trying to break this woman, he'd actually unleashed something he couldn't control. "Cut her down," he said quietly. "Take her back." As the boys untied Lucy and carried her away, She was still talking to the invisible presences around her, still smiling that knowing smile, still prophesying about the 10th day to come. And Pike stood alone in the yard, staring at his hands, which were shaking, and wondering what he'd done, what he'd created, what was waiting for him 10 days from now. Back in the infirmary, Sister Ruth asked Lucy what she'd seen, who she'd been talking to. Everyone who ever suffered here, Lucy replied simply. They all gathering, getting ready. 'Cause when day 40 comes, we ain't gonna be the only ones seeking justice. The dead gonna have their say too. And as night fell over Wycliffe Plantation, folks swore they heard things. Whispers in languages that hadn't been spoken in generations. Footsteps where no one walked. Chains rattling though no slave wore chains at night. The plantation itself seemed to be waking up, remembering, preparing. Something was coming. Something ancient and terrible and righteous. And Pike, poor damned Pike, was right at the center of it. Now children, settle in close, 'cause day 30 was when everything truly shifted. When the hunter became the hunted. When Pike, who'd spent a lifetime making others fear him, finally understood what it meant to be afraid. Real afraid. The kind of fear that lives in your bones and whispers to you in the dark that you've done something you can't take back. That morning started different from all the others. The air itself felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. Like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The birds didn't sing. The wind didn't blow. Even the sun seemed reluctant to rise, casting everything in a strange reddish light that made folks think of blood. Pike came to collect Lucy as usual, but he brought more men this time. Not just the 2 boys and the paddy rollers, but 6 additional slaves, strong men who could restrain her if needed. Though what they thought a woman who could barely stand might do, nobody could say. But Pike was spooked. Had been ever since Lucy started talking to spirits, since she'd looked at him with pity instead of fear, since she'd started prophesying about day 40. He hadn't slept right in days. Kept waking up from nightmares where Lucy's ruined back became a mouth that spoke accusations, where her blood turned to salt and filled his lungs until he couldn't breathe, where the ghosts of all the slaves he'd killed over the years stood in a circle around his bed watching him with dead eyes. Master Wycliffe had noticed Pike's deterioration, called him in the night before, asked him straight, "Is this worth it? This vendetta against one slave woman? You're exhausted jumping at shadows and the other slaves are more restless than ever. Just end it. Kill her if you have to, but end it." But Pike couldn't. Because if he ended it before day 40, before Lucy broke, then he'd lost. And everything he'd built his identity on, his reputation as an unbreakable overseer, his ability to control slaves through fear, would crumble. So he had to see it through, had to reach day 40. Had to make Lucy submit, make her beg, make her scream. Just 10 more days, he could manage 10 more days. When they brought Lucy out, Pike noticed she was different again. Stronger somehow, despite being closer to death than ever. She walked under her own power, barely, leaning on the boys who'd been her torturers but walking nonetheless. Her head was up, her eyes clear. And when she saw the whipping post, she didn't flinch or hesitate. Just walked right to it and turned around, presenting her destroyed back without being asked. The men tied her up, and Pike noticed they did it gentle. Too gentle. Like they was handling something sacred instead of punishing something defiant. That angered him. Made him feel like he was losing control not just of Lucy, but of the entire plantation. "Tighter," he snapped. "Bind her proper." The men obeyed, but reluctantly. Pike could feel their doubt, their fear, their growing belief that Lucy was something more than just a stubborn slave. And that doubt was contagious. He could see it spreading through the crowd of witnesses, could feel the way they looked at Lucy now. Not with pity, but with something approaching reverence. The boys approached with the salt, hands shaking worse than ever. Samuel looked like death itself, hollow-eyed, thin, barely present. The guilt was eating him alive from the inside out. His mama had begged him to eat, to sleep, to pray for forgiveness, but nothing helped. He was drowning in what he'd been forced to do. As Samuel reached out with the first handful of salt, his hand trembling so badly the crystals spilled through his fingers. Lucy turned her head and looked directly at Pike. Really looked at him, and Pike froze. It was her eyes. The same eyes he'd seen 1,000 times over the past 30 days, but different now. Transformed. They was dark as midnight but somehow lit from within, like there was a fire burning behind them. And they was knowing. Too knowing. Like they could see straight through his skin, straight through his flesh, straight into the core of who he was, and found him wanting. Pike had stared down grown men without flinching, had beaten slaves until they begged for death, had sent runaways to their graves without losing a minute of sleep. But under Lucy's gaze, he felt something he'd never felt before. Shame. And beneath the shame, rising like floodwater, was fear. Because Lucy wasn't looking at him like a victim looks at her torturer. She was looking at him like a judge looks at the condemned, like someone who'd already seen his future and knew it ended badly. "You feel it, don't you?" Lucy said, voice clear despite her physical weakness. "You feel them gathering, the spirits, the ancestors, all the souls you'd done wronged over the years. They all here now, Pike, and they waiting." Pike's mouth went dry. "Shut up," he said, but his voice cracked slightly. "Can't shut up truth," Lucy continued, never breaking eye contact. "Truth got a way of speaking no matter how hard you try to silence it. And the truth is, you a dead man walking. You just don't know it yet." Something cold slithered down Pike's spine. He wanted to look away, to break the connection of that terrible gaze, but he couldn't. Was held there like a bird before a snake, mesmerized and terrified in equal measure. "Apply the salt," Pike ordered the boys, trying to assert control, trying to restore the natural order. But his voice sounded thin, uncertain even to his own ears. Samuel pressed the salt into Lucy's wounds, tears streaming down his face, whispering apologies that Lucy acknowledged with small nods. But she never looked away from Pike, never stopped pinning him with those knowing, judging eyes. And then something happened that would be talked about in slave quarters for generations to come. Lucy smiled, not a grimace of pain, not a desperate attempt at bravery, a real smile, calm and certain and almost joyful. 10 more days, she said softly. 10 more days and you're gonna understand everything. 10 more days and the debt comes due. Pike felt his bladder nearly let go, felt his knees go weak, felt fear so pure and primal that it made him dizzy. Because in that moment, he believed her. Believed that something terrible was waiting for him on day 40. Believed that all his cruelty was about to come back on him like a curse. "What?" he started to ask, then stopped. Didn't want to know, couldn't bear to know. "You want to know what's coming?" Lucy asked, reading his unspoken question. "You want to know how this ends?" Pike did and didn't, stood there paralyzed, watching as Lucy's smile grew wider, as her eyes seemed to glow with inner light. "Fire," Lucy whispered. "Salt. Blood. Justice. All the things you gave me coming back to you tenfold. That's what's waiting, that's what's coming. And ain't nothing, not your guns, not your whips, not your power, gonna stop it." The crowd of watching slaves gasped. Some made signs against evil. Others nodded, believing, accepting, waiting to see if Lucy's prophecy would come true. Pike stumbled backward, nearly falling. His hand went to his pistol, drew it, pointed it at Lucy's head. "I could kill you right now," he said, voice high and strained. "End this right here." "You could," Lucy agreed, still smiling. "But you won't. 'Cause killing me now means you lost. Means I won. Means you couldn't break me even with 40 days of torture. And your pride won't let you admit that. So you gonna keep going. Gonna see this through to day 40. Gonna walk straight into your own destruction 'cause you too proud to stop." Pike's hand shook. The pistol wavered. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to pull the trigger, to end this nightmare, to kill this woman who'd somehow turned his victory into his doom. But he couldn't do it, because Lucy was right. Killing her now would be admitting defeat, would be admitting that a slave woman, a property, a nothing, a piece of merchandise, had beaten him, and his pride, his terrible pride, wouldn't allow it. He lowered the pistol slowly, hand still shaking. "Finish the salt," he ordered the boys. "Then take her back." As they completed the daily torture and cut Lucy down, Pike stood there watching, feeling like the ground was shifting under his feet. Feeling like he'd just stepped onto a path that led somewhere dark, somewhere final, somewhere he couldn't come back from. Lucy was carried away, still conscious, still smiling that knowing smile, still looking at Pike with eyes that promised retribution. And Pike, for the first time in his life, felt truly helpless. Felt like he was caught in something bigger than himself, something he'd set in motion but couldn't control. Like he'd made a deal with the devil without realizing it, and now the devil was coming to collect. That night, Pike didn't go home to his small house at the edge of the plantation. Stayed in the barn, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle, trying to drown the memory of Lucy's eyes, Lucy's smile, Lucy's prophecy. But drunk or sober, he couldn't escape it. Couldn't escape the growing certainty that day 40 was coming, that Lucy had somehow already won, that his reckoning was approaching like storm clouds on the horizon. He'd wanted to break her. Instead, she'd broken something in him, something fundamental, something that couldn't be fixed. And in the infirmary, Lucy lay on her pallet, body destroyed but spirit blazing bright, and whispered to her ancestors, 9 more days. Just 9 more days and justice gonna speak. Children, I gotta warn you now. What I'm about to tell you is when Pike's desperation turned to madness, when a man so consumed by fear and rage decided that if he couldn't break Lucy's spirit, he'd destroy her body completely. This is day 39, the eve of reckoning, the last night before justice came due. Pike hadn't slept in 4 days. His eyes was bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that made him look like a haunt himself. He'd been drinking heavy, whiskey for courage, rum for anger, anything to drown out the voice in his head that kept repeating Lucy's words. 10 more days, and the debt comes due. Well, them 10 days was almost up, and Pike was terrified of what day 40 might bring. He'd tried everything to break Lucy. 40 days of salt in her wounds, double sessions, triple sessions on some days when his frustration peaked. He'd withheld water, withheld food, left her tied to the post under the burning sun for hours after the salt treatment. But nothing worked. Lucy endured it all with that terrible calm, that knowing smile, that prophetic voice speaking of justice and reckoning. The other slaves had changed too. They moved different now, worked slower, sang songs in the fields that Pike couldn't quite decipher, but that felt like coded messages, like warnings, like promises. He'd catch them looking at him sometimes, not with fear anymore, but with expectation, like they was all waiting for something, like they knew something he didn't. Master Wycliffe had called him in again that morning. The conversation was brief and brutal. "Tomorrow is day 40, Master Wycliffe said, voice cold as January frost. "Your experiment has failed. That woman is still defiant, still prophesying, still causing unrest. The slaves see her as some kind of martyr now. You've made everything worse. Give me 1 more day," Pike begged, and there was desperation in his voice that made Master Wycliffe's lip curl with disgust. 1 more day to break her completely. I have a plan." "What kind of plan?" Pike leaned forward, eyes gleaming with a mixture of madness and determination. Salt in the wounds was one thing. "But tomorrow I'm gonna boil salt water in the big rendering kettle. Gonna make her final punishment something so terrible, so complete, that even if she survives it, her spirit will be crushed. And every slave on this plantation will see what happens to them who defy me." Master Wycliffe studied his overseer for a long moment, saw the desperation, the fear, the unraveling. "You're obsessed," he observed. "This woman has gotten inside your head. She's a witch," Pike hissed. "She's conjured something, put a curse on me, I can feel it. But curses break when the person who cast them breaks. So I break her, I break the curse, and everything goes back to normal." Master Wycliffe sighed. "Fine. 1 last day. But Pike, if this doesn't work, if she's still standing after tomorrow, I want her sold. Sold far away where her influence can't reach my plantation. And I'll be looking for a new overseer. Understood?" Pike nodded, barely hearing the threat. All he could think about was tomorrow. About the boiling salt water. About finally making Lucy scream, making her beg, making her submit. That afternoon, Pike ordered the big iron kettle brought out from the smokehouse, the one they used for rendering lard and boiling water for hog slaughter. It was massive, could hold 50 gallons easy. He had it set up in the middle of the yard, right next to the whipping post, and ordered wood stacked beneath it. "What that for?" one of the house servants asked, voice trembling. "Tomorrow's lesson," Pike said with a grim smile. "Tomorrow everyone gonna understand that I am still master here. That no curse, no conjure, no slave woman can stand against me." Word spread through the quarters like wildfire. Pike was planning something terrible, something worse than the 40 days of salt. Folks gathered in small groups, whispering, praying, wondering if Lucy could survive whatever Pike had planned. Aunt Bess went to the infirmary that night to see Lucy. Found her sitting up again. Impossible given her condition. But there she was, back straight despite the ruin of flesh and bone, eyes bright with that inner fire. "Child," Aunt Bess said softly, "Pike is planning something evil for tomorrow. Something with boiling water and salt. You know this, don't you?" "I know," Lucy said calmly. "The ancestors showed me everything that's coming." "Can you survive it?" Lucy smiled, that same knowing, peaceful smile that had haunted Pike's nightmares. "Don't need to survive it, Auntie. Just need to endure it long enough for justice to speak." "What's gonna happen tomorrow, child? What you seen?" Lucy's eyes went distant, seeing something beyond the cabin walls, beyond the present moment. Fire and water. Salt and blood. A reckoning 40 days in the making. Pike thinks he's preparing my destruction, but really he's preparing his own. The ancestors been patient, been watching, been waiting. Tomorrow they gonna move. Tomorrow everything changes. Aunt Bess felt chills despite the warm night. "You gonna kill him?" "I ain't gonna kill nobody," Lucy said softly. "But justice don't need my hand. Justice got its own ways of working. Pike spent 40 days teaching me about salt and suffering. Tomorrow he gonna learn those same lessons his own self. I don't understand." "You will," Lucy promised. "Come dawn, everyone gonna understand." That night Pike couldn't sleep at all. Kept getting up, pacing, checking his pistol, drinking more whiskey. He kept seeing Lucy's face in every shadow, kept hearing her voice in every sound. The plantation felt alive around him, not in a good way, but in a threatening way. Like the earth itself was watching him, waiting for him to make his final mistake. At midnight, he went out to check on the kettle. Stood there in the moonlight, staring at the massive iron pot, imagining it filled with boiling salt water, imagining Lucy's screams finally breaking the terrible silence of her suffering. But as he stood there, he heard something. Singing. Low and rhythmic, coming from the direction of the slave quarters. Not English words, African words, old words. A whole chorus of voices joined together in a chant that made his blood run cold. He ran toward the sound, pistol drawn, but when he reached the quarters, the singing stopped. The cabins was dark and silent, nobody in sight, but Pike could feel them watching from behind closed doors, from darkened windows, from the spaces between buildings. Could feel their anticipation, their certainty, their knowledge that something was coming. "Show yourselves," he shouted into the darkness. "I know you're there." No response. Just silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that pressed down on him like a physical weight. Pike stood there for a long time, pistol shaking in his hand, realizing that he'd lost something fundamental. The slaves wasn't afraid of him anymore. They was waiting for him to fall, expecting it, knowing it was coming. He stumbled back to the barn, drank more whiskey, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose on day 40, rising red and angry, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, Pike emerged with purpose. This was it. The final day. The day he'd either break Lucy completely or be destroyed trying. He gathered all his men, all the paddy rollers, all the slave drivers, even brought Master Wycliffe out to witness. He wanted everyone to see, wanted the moment to be so terrible, so absolute, that it erased everything that had come before. They filled the kettle with water from the well, added barrel after barrel of coarse salt until the water turned cloudy and thick. Then they built a fire underneath, a big fire fed with pine and oak, flames licking up the sides of the iron kettle with hungry tongues. The slaves was forced to gather and watch, every man, woman, and child on Wycliffe Plantation. They stood in a great circle around the kettle and the post, faces grim, hearts pounding, knowing that what happened next would be remembered forever. Pike stood before them all and spoke in a loud voice. "Today is the final day. 40 days this woman has defied me, but today her defiance ends. Today she learns the price of rebellion. Today she breaks." He gestured to the kettle, which was already beginning to steam as the water heated. When that water boils, when the salt water reaches its full heat, this slave will be subjected to it in ways that will teach everyone here a lesson they'll never forget. The slaves gasped. Some of the women began weeping. Even some of Pike's own men looked uncomfortable. But Pike didn't care. His eyes was wild, his face flushed with fever and determination. He was a man possessed, driven by fear and pride and rage to commit an atrocity that would mark his soul forever. "Bring her out," he commanded. "Bring Lucy out, let's finish this." And as they went to fetch Lucy from the infirmary, as the water in the kettle began to bubble and roil, as the sun climbed higher in that blood-red sky, everyone could feel it. The presence of something vast and terrible gathering. The weight of 40 days of suffering reaching its breaking point. The moment before justice strikes like lightning from a clear sky. Pike thought he was preparing Lucy's destruction, but really he was preparing his own. Now, children, what I'm about to tell you, this is the moment everything changed. The moment when 40 days of suffering transformed into 40 seconds of justice. The moment when Lucy, broken in body but unbreakable in spirit, became something more than human, became vengeance itself, became the answer to every prayer whispered in the dark by every slave who'd ever asked, "How long, Lord? How long?" They brought Lucy out, and the sight of her made even hardened men turn away. She was barely recognizable as the woman who'd defied Pike 40 days ago. Her body was wasted to nothing, skin stretched tight over bones, every rib visible. Her back was a landscape of horror, deep craters where flesh had been eaten away by salt, exposed bone gleaming white in the morning sun, infection spreading in dark webs across what little skin remained. But her eyes, sweet Jesus, her eyes was alive, burning with inner fire. Fixed on that boiling kettle with a look that wasn't fear, wasn't resignation, but something else entirely. Something that made Pike's triumphant smile falter for just a moment. They didn't tie her to the post this time. Instead, Pike had them bring her close to the kettle, close enough that the steam rising from the boiling salt water made the air shimmer with heat, close enough that everyone could see what was about to happen. "This is the final lesson," Pike announced to the assembled crowd. His voice was high, strained, carrying the edge of hysteria. 40 days ago this woman defied me, but today she submits. Today she breaks. Today everyone here will see what happens to them who forget their place. Master Wycliffe stood off to the side, face troubled, hand resting on his pistol. He'd agreed to this final punishment, but now that the moment had come, he felt uneasy. The air was wrong, too heavy, too charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. The slaves stood in their forced circle, silent as graves. But Pike could feel their attention wasn't on him anymore. It was on Lucy, always on Lucy. Like she was the center of some invisible current that flowed through the plantation, connecting every enslaved soul in a web of shared suffering and shared hope. Pike grabbed a long-handled ladle from one of his men and dipped it into the boiling salt water. Steam rose in white clouds. The water bubbled and roiled, spitting and hissing like a living thing. "Hold her," he commanded. Two men grabbed Lucy's arms, not rough, Pike noticed with anger, but gentle, apologetic. Even his own men had been infected by whatever spell Lucy had cast. "This is your last chance," Pike said, bringing the ladle close to Lucy's face so she could feel the heat radiating from it. "Beg for mercy. Submit. Acknowledge me as your master and I'll make this quick. Refuse and I'll make it last." Lucy's eyes lifted from the kettle to Pike's face, and she smiled. That same peaceful, knowing smile that had haunted him for days. "You still don't understand," she said softly. "You think you holding power here. But you just a tool, just an instrument. Everything you done these 40 days, all of it was preparing this moment, not my breaking. Your reckoning." Pike's hand shook, spilling drops of boiling water that hissed when they hit the ground. "Last chance," he repeated, voice cracking. "I ain't begging you for nothing," Lucy said clearly. "But I'll give you one last warning, Pike. Walk away now. Walk away and maybe you live to see tomorrow, but if you do what you planning to do, if you pour that water on me, then justice gonna answer. And it won't be me answering. It'll be every soul you ever wronged, every ancestor watching from the other side, every drop of blood this ground done swallowed. You understand?" For a moment, just a moment, Pike hesitated, because Lucy's eyes held absolute certainty, not the false bravado of someone trying to bluff their way out of torture. Real certainty, the kind that comes from knowing the future. But pride is a terrible master, and Pike's pride had driven him too far to turn back now. "Hold her tight," he said to the men, and he lifted the ladle high, tilting it so the boiling salt water would pour down onto Lucy's already ruined back. That's when Lucy moved. Nobody expected it. Nobody thought she had the strength left, but 40 days of torture had taught Lucy something about pain, about endurance, about the distance between body and spirit. She'd learned to ignore what her flesh was screaming, learned to move through agony like it was water, learned to let her ancestors guide her hands when her own strength failed. She twisted, fast as a snake strike, powerful as a buffalo's charge, and broke free from the men holding her. Before Pike could react, before anyone could stop her, Lucy's hands, those ruined, broken, impossibly strong hands, shot out and grabbed the kettle itself. The heat should have destroyed her, should have burned the flesh right off her bones. But Lucy didn't seem to feel it, didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. She grabbed that massive iron kettle like it weighed nothing, muscles that shouldn't have had any strength left somehow finding power from some deep well of ancestral fury. And she lifted it, lifted 50 gallons of boiling salt water above her head. The crowd gasped. Pike's eyes went wide with shock and terror. "This is for my mama," Lucy said, voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. "Sold away screaming my name." She tilted the kettle. Boiling water began to pour. "This is for my daddy," Lucy continued, "whipped to death for a crime he didn't commit." Pike stumbled backward, but not fast enough. The first splash of boiling salt water hit his chest, soaking through his shirt, scalding his skin. He screamed, a high, terrible sound that echoed across the plantation. "This is for every child sold at auction," Lucy said, advancing, still holding the kettle, still pouring. "Every mother who lost her baby, every man broken on the post." Pike fell, hands up to protect his face, but Lucy followed him down. The water kept coming, kept scalding, kept burning. It hit his arms, his neck, his face. The salt in the water made it cling to his skin, intensifying the burning, eating into his flesh like acid. "This is for 40 days of suffering," Lucy whispered, standing over Pike now, tilting the kettle so the remaining water poured directly onto his throat. "This is justice. This is reckoning. This is the debt coming due." Pike's screams were inhuman. His body convulsed, skin already blistering and peeling, the smell of burned flesh filling the air. He tried to speak, tried to beg, but his throat was too damaged, vocal cords seared by the boiling salt. The slaves stood frozen, unable to believe what they was witnessing. Master Wycliffe drew his pistol but didn't fire, couldn't fire, because what he was seeing was impossible. Lucy, who should have been too weak to stand, was standing over Pike like an avenging angel, like justice personified, like every wronged soul given flesh and power. When the kettle was finally empty, Lucy let it fall. It hit the ground with a heavy clang that seemed to break the spell holding everyone frozen. Pike lay there, twitching, making sounds that wasn't quite human anymore. His skin was a ruin of burns and blisters, his face unrecognizable, his body destroyed by the same weapon he'd prepared to use on Lucy. Lucy stood over him, swaying now, the borrowed strength that had carried her through the act beginning to fade. But she didn't collapse yet. Instead, she looked around at all the assembled slaves, at the white men with their guns, at Master Wycliffe with his drawn pistol. "I ain't running," she announced. "Ain't hiding. What I did here was justice. Pure and simple, and every one of you watching knows it true." Master Wycliffe's hand tightened on his pistol. He should shoot her, should end this right now. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the look in the slave's eyes, not fear anymore, but something awakened, something dangerous. Maybe it was the way Lucy stood there, ruined and broken but somehow glorious, like a warrior who just won an impossible battle. Maybe it was just the knowledge that killing her now would make her a martyr, would turn her from a person into a legend that would haunt his plantation forever. Pike made one last gurgling sound and went still. Whether dead or dying, nobody could say. But it didn't matter. He was finished, destroyed by the same cruelty he'd inflicted. Lucy finally fell then, collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The slaves rushed forward, no longer afraid, no longer cowed, and caught her before she hit the ground. "Get her out of here," Aunt Bess commanded, taking charge. "Hide her. Protect her. She done what needed doing, and now we gonna keep her safe." Master Wycliffe should have stopped them, should have ordered his men to seize Lucy, to restore order, to punish the uprising before it spread. But he didn't. Just stood there, pistol lowering slowly, watching as the slaves carried Lucy away, watching as the natural order of his plantation crumbled around him. Because he understood now, understood that Lucy had done something that couldn't be undone, had shown every slave on his plantation that resistance was possible, that justice could be claimed, that the powerful could fall. The 40 days of salt had forged Lucy into a weapon, and that weapon had just struck with all the accumulated force of generations of suffering. Pike had wanted to break her. Instead, he'd created something unbreakable, something eternal, something that would echo through history as long as people remembered slavery, remembered resistance, remembered the woman who transformed suffering into strength. Her name was Lucy, and she became salt, and she became justice, and she became free. Lord have mercy, children. What came next was chaos like Wycliffe Plantation had never seen. The kind of chaos that happens when the natural order, the terrible evil order built on chains and whips and fear, suddenly collapses. When slaves stop being slaves for just a moment and remember they're human beings. When white folks realize their power was always an illusion, maintained only by the willingness of the oppressed to accept their oppression. The moment Lucy fell and the slaves rushed forward to catch her, Master Wycliffe's paralysis broke. He raised his pistol and fired a shot into the air, a sharp crack that should have scattered the slaves like frightened birds. But it didn't. They didn't even flinch, just kept moving, forming a protective circle around Lucy's unconscious body, creating a wall of flesh between her and the white men. "Stand aside," Master Wycliffe shouted, voice high with panic. "That slave just murdered my overseer. Stand aside or I'll shoot every last one of you." But the slaves didn't move, didn't obey, just stood there, silent and solid, their bodies saying what their mouths couldn't. No more. Not today. Not ever again. For the first time in his life, Master Wycliffe understood true fear. Because he was outnumbered 50 to 1, and the only thing that had ever kept him safe was the slave's belief that resistance was impossible. But Lucy had just proven it wasn't, had just shown that the powerful could fall, that justice could be claimed, that 40 days of suffering could transform into 40 seconds of retribution. "Get the patty rollers," Master Wycliffe screamed at his remaining men. "Get reinforcements from town. Get the militia. We need armed men, now." The white men scattered, running for horses, for weapons, for help. And in their panic, they left the slaves alone with Lucy, alone with their moment of power, alone with the possibility, however brief, of freedom. Aunt Bess took charge immediate-like. She'd lived through slave revolts before, seen what happened when the white folks' fear turned to vengeance. They had maybe an hour before armed men descended on the plantation with guns and ropes and bloodlust. Had to move fast, had to be smart. "Samuel, Marcus, John, carry Miss Lucy to the root cellar under my cabin," she commanded. "Sarah, Ruth, bring water and clean rags. We gotta tend her wounds. The rest of you, back to the quarters, back to work, act like nothing happened. The more of us they can blame, the more of us they'll kill." "But Miss Lucy," one young man started to protest. "Miss Lucy did what she had to do," Aunt Bess cut him off. "And now we do what we gotta do. Keep her alive long enough to see what comes next. Move." They carried Lucy through the quarters, her body limp but breathing, her ruined back still weeping blood and fluid. Down into Aunt Bess's cabin, through a hidden trapdoor beneath a pile of old blankets, into a small earthen room that smelled of roots and herbs and ancient secrets. A hiding place built long ago for runaway slaves passing through on the Underground Railroad. Sister Ruth was already there, waiting with her healing supplies. When she saw Lucy's back in the dim lamplight, she wept. How is she even alive? How is any of this possible? Ancestors kept her breathing, Aunt Bess said simply. Now we gotta do our part. Clean them wounds best you can, give her water if she wakes. And pray, sister. Pray like you never prayed before. Above ground, the plantation was descending into panic. Master Wycliffe had locked himself in the big house, pistol in hand, watching through the windows as his slaves moved about their business like nothing had happened. But he could see it in their faces, in the way they carried themselves. Something had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by something harder, something dangerous. Pike's body still lay in the yard, next to the overturned kettle, flies already gathering. Nobody dared touch him. Nobody wanted to get near him. He'd become a symbol now, not of white power, but of its limits. Of what happened when cruelty went too far, pushed too hard. Forgot that even the most oppressed soul has a breaking point. The patty rollers arrived within the hour. 6 rough white men with rifles and dogs and a taste for violence. They rode into the plantation yard like avenging angels, ready to restore order through blood and bullets. "Where is she?" Their leader, a man named Hutchins with a scar across his jaw, demanded. "Where's the slave that killed Pike?" "Don't know," Master Wycliffe lied, surprising himself. "The slaves scattered after it happened. Could be anywhere by now." Hutchins spat tobacco juice on the ground. "Then we search every cabin. Turn this place upside down, and we make examples. Can't let slaves think they can kill white men and walk away." They tore through the quarters like a tornado, kicked in doors, overturned furniture, dumped out food stores, scattered belongings. The slaves watched in silence, faces carefully blank, hiding their rage behind masks of submission. But they found nothing. No Lucy. No evidence. Just frightened-looking slaves who claimed ignorance, who swore they didn't know where she'd gone, who trembled appropriately when questioned. Hutchins grew frustrated, violent. He grabbed one old man by the throat, pressed a knife to his ribs. "Tell me where she is, or I gut you right here." The old man just stared at him with rheumy eyes and said nothing. Didn't even flinch. Hutchins released him with a curse, turned to Master Wycliffe. "Your slaves are protecting her. They know where she is. We need to make them talk." "How?" Master Wycliffe asked, voice hollow. He was staring at Pike's body, realizing that his overseer's obsession had brought this disaster down on them all. "The usual way," Hutchins said with a cruel smile. "Pick one. Make an example." Pain loosens tongues real quick. But before he could act on his threat, one of his men came running from the tree line. "Sir, there's tracks leading into the woods. Looks like someone went that way. Could be her." Hutchins's eyes lit up with savage joy. "Get the dogs, she's running. We'll hunt her down like the animal she is." They mounted up and rode toward the woods, dogs baying, rifles ready. Master Wycliffe watched them go, a sick feeling in his stomach, because part of him, a part he'd never acknowledge out loud. Hoped they wouldn't find her. Hoped Lucy had somehow escaped, somehow gotten away clean. Because if they caught her, they'd kill her slow. Make her death a spectacle. Use her suffering to terrorize every slave in the county. And somehow, after watching her endure 40 days of torture with impossible dignity, after seeing her transform suffering into justice, the thought of her being hunted like game filled him with something that felt uncomfortably like shame. Below ground, in the dark safety of the root cellar, Lucy's eyes opened. She was back in her body now, the ancestral strength that had carried her through her act of justice fading away, leaving only pain and weakness. Sister Ruth was wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring prayers. "Did I kill him?" Lucy whispered, voice barely audible. "Don't know if he dead yet," Sister Ruth answered honestly. "But he ain't long for this world either way. You destroyed him, child. Gave him back everything he gave you." Lucy smiled faintly. "Good, that's good. They searching for you, got dogs and guns and evil intent. We gotta figure out how to get you away from here." "No," Lucy said firmly, trying to sit up and failing. "No running. I did what I did in front of everybody. If I run now, it makes it seem like I was wrong, like I should be ashamed, but I ain't ashamed. And I ain't running." Aunt Bess, who'd been listening from the corner, moved closer. "Child, if they catch you, they gonna kill you terrible." "They was already killing me terrible," Lucy pointed out. "Least this way I die with my head up. Die having struck back. Die knowing I showed every slave on this plantation that we ain't helpless, that we can fight, that justice can be ours if we brave enough to take it. You really willing to die for that?" Lucy's eyes burned with that familiar inner fire. "I've been dying for 40 days, at least now I'm dying free." The three women sat in silence, listening to the distant sounds of dogs barking, men shouting, the plantation tearing itself apart, trying to find the woman who'd broken its power. And somewhere in that darkness, Lucy DuSalle, broken in body but unbroken in spirit, waited for whatever came next, waited with the patience of someone who'd endured the unendurable, waited with the peace of someone who'd already won the only victory that mattered. She'd proven that even in slavery's darkest pit, even after 40 days of torture designed to destroy the soul, the human spirit could not be broken, could not be owned, could not be controlled. And that truth, once revealed, could never be hidden again. Now, children, what I'm about to tell you is the part where legend and truth start to blur together, where what actually happened and what people swear happened become impossible to separate. Because in them next days and weeks, Lucy DuSalle stopped being just a woman and became something more, became a story, became a warning, became a hope that couldn't be killed no matter how hard folks tried. The patty rollers and their dogs hunted through the woods for 3 days straight. They followed tracks that seemed to lead everywhere and nowhere. They searched every hollow tree, every cave, every abandoned shack within 10 miles of Wycliffe Plantation. But they found nothing. No Lucy. No trace of her except them mysterious tracks that appeared and disappeared like she could walk on air when she wanted. Hutchins was furious. "She's got help," he insisted to Master Wycliffe. "Your slaves are hiding her, feeding her, moving her around at night, I guarantee it." But Master Wycliffe wasn't so sure, because strange things was happening on the plantation. Things that couldn't be explained by simple slave resistance. Things that felt supernatural. The first strange thing was Pike. He didn't die right away like everyone expected. Instead, he lingered for 5 agonizing days, his burned body refusing to let go of life, his ruined throat making sounds that kept everyone who heard them awake at night. The doctor from town came, took one look, and said there was nothing to be done. Pike was too far gone. Should have been dead already, but he wasn't dead. Was trapped in his destroyed body, unable to speak, unable to move much, just lying there in terrible pain while his burns festered and his flesh rotted. And the slaves who had to tend him, because someone had to and no white person wanted the job, swore they heard him whispering in the night, whispering one word over and over: "Lucy, Whether it was curse or apology or just delirium, nobody could say. But hearing it gave folks chills. Made them think Pike's soul was already suffering for what he'd done, even while his body still clung to life. The second strange thing was the salt. Folks started finding it in odd places. Little piles of coarse white crystals on doorsteps, in corners of rooms, along pathways. Nobody admitted to putting it there, but it kept appearing. And the slaves knew what it meant. Salt for protection, salt to mark Lucy's presence, salt to remind everyone of what she'd endured and what she'd done. The white folks tried to sweep it away, but more appeared the next day. Like the earth itself was weeping salt, marking the plantation with Lucy's suffering, refusing to let anyone forget. The third strange thing was the sightings. Slaves working in distant fields claimed they saw a woman matching Lucy's description, walking along the tree line at dusk. House servants swore they glimpsed her shadow passing by windows at night. Children playing near the creek said they heard singing, old African songs in a voice that sounded like Lucy's. But whenever the paddy rollers investigated, whenever they rushed to the reported location with dogs and guns, they found nothing. Just empty spaces where Lucy supposedly was, just echoes of her presence without the person herself. Hutchins was convinced the slaves were lying, creating false sightings to confuse the search. But Master Wycliffe wasn't so sure. Because he'd seen Lucy do the impossible, seen her lift a kettle that should have been too heavy, survive torture that should have killed her, move with strength she shouldn't have possessed. What if she really was protected by something beyond human understanding? What if the ancestors the slaves talked about was real? What if Lucy had somehow transcended the normal limitations of flesh and become something else entirely? By the end of the first week, the search had expanded to neighboring plantations. Wanted notices went up in every town within 50 miles. Runaway slave, female, small build, severely scarred back, dangerous. Reward for capture, $500. But nobody came forward with information, and the sightings continued. Lucy was seen in 3 different places on the same night, was reported walking north toward freedom and south toward the coast simultaneously, was everywhere and nowhere, present and absent, real and ghostly. The slaves, meanwhile, kept their secrets. They knew Lucy was still in the root cellar beneath Aunt Bess's cabin, hovering between life and death, her body slowly healing with Sister Ruth's herbs and prayers. But they also knew that the mystery surrounding her disappearance was protecting them all. As long as the white folks believed Lucy might be anywhere, they couldn't focus their violence on the quarters, couldn't single out individuals for punishment. So they fed the legend, dropped hints about seeing Lucy here and there, spoke in whispers about her supernatural powers, her communion with spirits, her ability to move unseen. And with each telling, the story grew larger, stranger, more powerful. By the second week, Pike finally died. His last moments was terrible, screaming without voice, thrashing without strength, his burned body finally giving up its hold on life. They buried him in the white cemetery with a simple marker. But rumors started immediately that his grave was cursed, that strange lights was seen there at night, that the smell of burned flesh and salt lingered around the plot even after the earth settled. Some white folks said Lucy had conjured a curse on Pike before she killed him. Others said the manner of his death, killed by his own intended weapon, was proof of divine justice. Still others claimed Pike's soul was trapped, unable to rest because he'd died unavenged. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Nobody wanted to be the next overseer of Wycliffe Plantation. Master Wycliffe put out inquiries, offered good wages, but found no takers. The story of Lucy and Pike had spread too far, carried too much weight. No man wanted to risk ending up like Pike, destroyed by the very people he tried to break. By the third week, Lucy was strong enough to sit up, to take solid food, to speak more than a few words at a time. Her wounds was healing, not completely, probably never completely, but enough that infection was fading. Enough that she might survive after all. "What happens now?" Sister Ruth asked her one night. "You can't stay hidden forever. Eventually they'll find you. Or give up looking and you'll have to come out anyway. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The ancestors been talking to me, she finally said, showing me things. Paths I could take, futures I might live. And I don't think I'm meant to stay here. But I don't think I'm meant to die either. Think I'm meant for something else, something bigger. Underground railroad, Aunt Bess suggested. We could get you connected with folks who run that line, get you north to freedom. Maybe, Lucy said. Or maybe I'm meant to become what they already think I am. A story, a legend. A woman who can't be caught because she don't need to be one place. Can be everywhere at once, in every slave's heart, in every whispered prayer for justice. The two older women exchanged glances. They understood. Lucy wasn't talking about physically escaping. She was talking about becoming something more than physical. Becoming an idea, a symbol, a living ghost that haunted the conscience of every slaveholder who heard her name. That's dangerous thinking, child, Aunt Bess warned. Everything about living is dangerous when you a slave, Lucy countered. At least this way, my danger got purpose. Got power. Got the ability to inspire others to stand up, fight back, claim their own justice. On the 21st day after Pike's death, 3 weeks to the day after Lucy's act of retribution, something impossible happened. A slave working alone in the far cotton field looked up and saw her. Not a glimpse, not a shadow. Lucy herself standing at the edge of the trees, her ruined back visible in the afternoon light, her eyes fixed on the plantation with that same knowing, peaceful expression. The slave blinked, and she was gone. But the image burned into his mind. He told others that night, they told others, and the story spread. Lucy DuSalle was still out there, still watching, still bearing witness, still reminding everyone that justice was possible, that resistance could succeed, that even the most broken among them could rise up and strike back. Master Wycliffe heard the reports and felt his stomach twist, because he knew what it meant. Whether Lucy was really out there or whether she died in hiding, and the slaves was just keeping her spirit alive, it didn't matter. The result was the same. Lucy had won. Not by escaping, not by surviving, but by becoming something bigger than any one person, by becoming an idea that couldn't be killed, a memory that couldn't be erased, a promise that echoed through every slave quarter in Alabama. This can be done. The powerful can fall, justice can be ours. And once that idea takes root, children, ain't no amount of chains or whips or laws can dig it out. It grows, it spreads, it waits for the right moment. And eventually, inevitably, it blooms. Listen here now, children, 'cause this is when Lucy DuSalle stopped being just a woman who fought back and became something holy, something sacred, something that walked the line between the living and the dead, between history and legend, between what was and what folks needed to believe. The months that followed her disappearance was marked by stories. So many stories, children. Stories that spread from plantation to plantation, carried by field hands who whispered while they worked, by house servants who overheard and remembered, by preachers in hush harbors who spoke her name like a prayer. The first miracle attributed to Lucy happened on Wycliffe Plantation itself, just 6 weeks after Pike's death. A young woman named Clara, no more than 17 years old, pregnant with her first child, went into labor early. Too early. The baby was coming wrong, Sister Ruth could tell, and there wasn't nothing she could do to fix it. Clara was gonna die, and the baby with her. Sister Ruth prayed all through that terrible night, begging God and the ancestors for mercy. But the labor just got worse. Clara's screams filled the quarters and folks gathered outside the cabin, knowing they was about to witness another tragedy, another life stolen by the cruelty of bondage and bad luck. Then, just before dawn, when Clara's breathing had gone shallow and weak, when Sister Ruth had given up hope, the door opened, and Lucy walked in. At least that's what 3 people swore they saw. Lucy, wearing a dress white as salt, her scarred back visible through the thin fabric, her eyes bright with that inner fire. She moved to Clara's bedside. placed her hands on the laboring woman's belly, and whispered something in that old language nobody understood, but everyone felt deep in their bones. The baby turned. Sister Ruth felt it happen under her hands. Impossible, miraculous, but real. The baby turned, and within the hour, Clara delivered a healthy girl child. Both mother and baby survived, strong and perfect. When folks turned to thank Lucy, to ask how she'd done it, she was gone. The door still closed, no footprints in the dust, like she'd never been there at all. But Clara swore she felt Lucy's hands on her belly. Sister Ruth swore she saw Lucy standing there, real as life. And the baby, when she grew old enough to understand, carried a birthmark on her shoulder that looked exactly like a hand made of salt crystals. The second miracle happened on a plantation 30 miles north. A man named Isaiah had been caught trying to run away. They'd brought him back, tied him to the whipping post, and the new overseer, determined to prove he wasn't weak like Pike had been, ordered 50 lashes. Isaiah took the first 20 without making a sound, but by 30, he was screaming. By 40, he was begging for death. And at 45, just as the overseer drew back his arm for another strike, a woman's voice rang out across the yard. "Enough!" Everyone turned. And standing at the edge of the cotton field, visible to every slave and white person present, was Lucy. Her back was to them, but they could see the terrible scarring, see the way the salt-white dress she wore seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. The overseer's whip hand froze. He couldn't explain why, couldn't explain the terror that seized his heart, but he couldn't bring that whip down, couldn't move at all. Just stood there, arm raised, while Lucy turned slowly to face him. Nobody who was there ever agreed on exactly what they saw in her face. Some said she was smiling, others said she was weeping. Still others said her expression was blank, peaceful, like a saint in a painting. But they all agreed on one thing. The overseer dropped his whip, walked away from the post, and never beat another slave as long as he lived. Isaiah survived. His wounds healed clean, which shouldn't have been possible after 45 lashes. And he swore for the rest of his life that he felt Lucy's hand on his shoulder while he hung from that post, felt her whisper in his ear, hold on. Your suffering ain't in vain." The third miracle was the strangest of all. An enslaved child, a boy of maybe 8 years old, got bit by a copperhead snake while working in the tobacco fields. The venom acted fast, swelling his leg, making him fevered and delirious. The plantation owner wouldn't pay for a doctor, not for a slave child, so the boy was left in his mama's cabin to die. His mama sat beside him all night, praying and weeping, begging God to spare her only child. And just before midnight, she fell asleep from exhaustion. When she woke at dawn, her boy was sleeping peaceful, fever broken, leg normal. And on the dirt floor beside his pallet was a circle made of salt. Coarse white salt arranged in a perfect ring around where the child slept. And in that salt was pressed a handprint, small, delicate, belonging to a woman who wasn't there anymore but had been. The bite mark on the boy's leg stayed, but it healed without infection, without poison, without death. And his mama knew with absolute certainty, that Lucy Dusal had come in the night and drawn the poison out, had called on powers older than slavery to save her child. These stories spread, multiplied, grew in the telling. Slaves who'd never met Lucy, who lived hundreds of miles away, started reporting sightings, started attributing good fortune to her intervention, started leaving offerings of salt at crossroads and river fords, places where Lucy was said to appear. The white folks tried to suppress the stories, called them superstition, ignorance, slave foolishness. But they couldn't stop the spread, couldn't prevent Lucy's name from becoming synonymous with resistance, with hope, with the possibility that even the most broken among them could rise up and claim justice. Some white people even started believing. Not that they'd admit it in polite company, but in private. In darkness, they whispered about the conjure woman of Alabama, the ghost with the salted back, the woman who couldn't die because she'd already endured worse than death. Master Wycliffe heard all the stories. Heard them from his remaining slaves, from visiting planters, from merchants in town who spoke of little else. And part of him, a part he'd never voice, believed them too. Because he'd seen Lucy survive the impossible, seen her transform suffering into power, seen her strike down Pike with strength no human should possess. Maybe she really was protected by something beyond human understanding. Maybe the ancestors the slaves talked about was real. Maybe Lucy had become a bridge between this world and the next, a living testimony to the unbreakable nature of the human spirit. Or maybe, and this thought troubled him most, maybe Lucy was still alive somewhere, hiding, being moved from plantation to plantation by a network of sympathetic slaves. Maybe she was flesh and blood, not spirit, and the sightings was real. Maybe she was out there, traveling through the South, helping slaves resist, inspiring rebellion, becoming the spark that would eventually ignite the fire that burned slavery down. He didn't know which possibility scared him more. By the time a year had passed since Pike's death, Lucy DuSalle had become more than a person. She was a movement, a revolution whispered in the quarters, a promise that echoed through the fields. We are not helpless. We are not weak. We can fight. We can win. Justice can be ours. Young slaves grew up hearing her name like a benediction. Old slaves spoke of her like a prophecy fulfilled. And everyone knew that when you felt your suffering was too great, when you thought you couldn't endure another day, when you wanted to give up and let death take you, that's when Lucy appeared. That's when you felt her presence, her strength, her reminder that survival itself is resistance, that living through horror is its own kind of victory. Was Lucy still alive in body? Had she made it north to freedom? Was she traveling through the South like folks claimed? Or had she died in that root cellar and been given proper burial in some secret place only the slaves knew about? Nobody could say for certain, but it didn't matter anymore. Because Lucy DuSalle lived in the hearts of every enslaved person who heard her story, lived in the courage of every woman who stood up to her master, lived in the defiance of every man who ran for freedom, lived in the whispered prayers in hush harbors, in the songs sung in the fields, in the dreams of liberation that no amount of chains could kill. She was the salt that preserved memory, the fire that burned away fear, the water that washed clean the sin of slavery. She was everywhere and nowhere, present and absent, human and divine. And her legacy was just beginning. Now, children, gather close one more time, 'cause we're almost at the end of this testimony. Almost at the place where history meets memory, where the story I'm telling you connects to the world you living in right now. 'Cause Lucy DuSalle's legacy didn't end with her disappearance, didn't end with the miracles, didn't end even when slavery itself finally fell. No, sir. Her legacy lives on in ways both seen and unseen, in the blood and bones of every person who descended from those who knew her name. The years passed. The plantation system continued, cruel as ever, but something had shifted. Overseers was more cautious. Punishments was still terrible, but they thought twice before going to the extremes that Pike had embraced. Because Lucy's story haunted them, made them wonder if they too might push too far, might create another woman who decided 40 days of torture was enough to transform suffering into vengeance. Wycliffe Plantation never recovered. Master Wycliffe tried to continue running it, tried to hire new overseers, tried to restore the old order. But the slaves there was different now. They worked, yes, they had no choice. But the fear was gone, replaced by something harder, something that couldn't be whipped out of them. They remembered Lucy, remembered what she'd done, and that memory made them unbreakable in ways that terrified the white folks. Within 5 years, Master Wycliffe sold the plantation, couldn't make it profitable anymore, couldn't control his slaves the way the system demanded. He moved to Charleston, lived out his days in a boarding house, drinking too much and jumping at shadows. Folks said he was haunted, that he'd wake up screaming in the night, claiming he saw a woman with a scarred back standing at the foot of his bed, just watching him with knowing eyes. He died in 1859, just 2 years before the war started. And on the day he died, A hot July afternoon, much like the day Lucy killed Pike. Every window in his boarding house shattered simultaneously. No storm, no earthquake, no explanation. Just glass exploding outward like the building itself was expelling something evil. The owner swept up the shards and found them coated in a fine white powder that tasted like salt. But Lucy's real legacy wasn't in haunting white folks. It was in what she gave to her people. Hope, dignity, the knowledge that resistance was possible, that justice, however delayed, however difficult, could be claimed. The Underground Railroad conductors heard her story and were inspired. They spoke her name in the safe houses, used her as an example of what courage looked like. If Lucy Du Sal could endure 40 days of torture and still strike back, they'd tell frightened runaways, then you can endure one night in the cold. You can walk one more mile. You can make it to freedom. The preachers in the hush harbors incorporated Lucy into their sermons. Not openly, couldn't risk the white folks hearing, but in coded language. Talked about a woman who was given salt for 40 days, like Jesus in the wilderness. Talked about rising up from suffering, about transformation through trial, about the moment when enough is enough and justice demands action. The children born in them years after Lucy's disappearance grew up with her story like a lullaby. Their mamas and grandmamas would rock them to sleep singing, "Hush now, baby, don't you cry. Lucy's watching from on high." Salt and fire, blood and pain. What they took, she took back again. And them children grew up believing that they too could be strong, could endure, could fight back when the time was right. Lucy became part of their identity, part of what it meant to be black and enslaved but not broken. Part of the spiritual armor they wore to survive each day. When the Civil War finally came, when enslaved people saw their chance for freedom, Lucy's story took on new meaning. Soldiers in the United States colored troops, black men fighting for liberation, painted salt symbols on their uniforms. Small white marks that looked like decorations to white officers, but that every black person recognized immediately. The mark of Lucy. The sign of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable and struck back. After the war, during Reconstruction, when formerly enslaved people was trying to build new lives in a world still hostile to their freedom, Lucy's name appeared in unexpected places. A school for black children in Montgomery was named Lucy's House. A mutual aid society in Mobile called themselves the Daughters of Salt. A church in Birmingham hung a painting of a black woman with a scarred back, standing tall despite her wounds, and beneath it was written simply, "She endured." And the stories continued. Even into the 20th century, folks reported seeing Lucy. An old woman in the 1920s swore Lucy appeared to her during a lynching, standing between the mob and the victim, her scarred back visible, her presence enough to make the white men hesitate long enough for the intended victim to escape. A girl in the 1950s, beaten for trying to attend a white school, claimed Lucy whispered to her in the hospital, "Your suffering ain't in vain. Keep fighting." Were these sightings real? Was Lucy's spirit truly moving through time, appearing at moments when her people needed her most? Or was she simply an idea so powerful, so necessary, that each generation reinvented her in the image of their own struggles? Don't matter, children, don't matter at all. Because real or spirit, physical or mythical, Lucy Du Sal accomplished something that transcends the limits of flesh and time. She proved that even in slavery's darkest hour, even in the pit of absolute powerlessness, the human spirit could not be destroyed, could not be owned, could not be forced to submit. She proved that suffering, when endured with dignity, becomes sacred. That resistance, even if it costs everything, is never wasted. That justice delayed is still justice waiting, and when it finally comes, it comes with the accumulated force of every wrong that preceded it. Master Wycliffe tried to erase her. The patty rollers tried to catch her. The system tried to pretend she never existed. But you can't erase what lives in the hearts of the people. Can't catch what moves through memory and song. Can't pretend away a truth that's been witnessed by hundreds and passed down through generations. Today, if you go to the place where Wycliffe Plantation once stood, and yes, children, the place still exists, though it's been farmland for 100 years now, you'll find something strange. In one corner of the old property, where the slave quarters used to be, there's a spot where nothing grows. Not weeds, not grass, not even moss. Just bare red clay earth. And in the center of that bare spot, folks keep finding salt. Little piles of coarse white crystals that appear overnight, that get swept away or scattered by rain, but that always come back. Like the earth itself is remembering. Like Lucy's suffering is so deeply carved into that ground that it keeps weeping salt, keeps marking itself with the symbol of what happened there. Some folks say Lucy's buried there, that the slaves gave her a secret funeral, and that spot is her unmarked grave. Others say she never died at all, that she's still out there somewhere, walking through the South, appearing when needed, protecting her people like a guardian spirit. Still others say it don't matter where her body is, 'cause Lucy DuSalle was never just a body. She was an idea, and ideas don't die. They just wait for the right moment to bloom again. Me? I think Lucy's everywhere, in every woman who refuses to be broken, in every person who looks at injustice and says, no more, in every act of resistance, small or large, that chips away at systems designed to destroy dignity. Lucy's in the grandmother teaching her grandchildren to stand tall, in the protester facing down authority, in the voice that speaks truth even when silence would be safer. She's in you, children, in your blood, in your bones, in the very fact that you sitting here listening to this story, proof that our people survived everything slavery tried to do to us, that we endured, that we're still here, still fighting, still claiming justice. And that, children, is Lucy's true legacy. Not the miracles, not the sightings, not even the revenge she took on Pike. Her legacy is survival, is resistance, is the unbreakable knowledge that we are human beings deserving of dignity, and no amount of chains or whips or laws can make us less than that. Lucy DuSalle taught us that lesson in salt and blood and fire, and we ain't never gonna forget it. Now, children, we come to the end of this testimony, the place where I must speak my final truth about Lucy DuSalle, not the woman she was, but what she became, what she remains, what she will always be as long as there are people who remember that suffering don't have the final word, that justice delayed ain't justice denied, and that the human spirit, our spirit, black folks' spirit, cannot be broken no matter how hard this world tries. So lean in close one last time. Let me tell you where Lucy lives today. 'Cause she ain't in no grave, children. She ain't in no history book written by white folks who'd rather forget she ever existed. She ain't even in the miracles and sightings and stories, though all them things is true in their own way. Lucy lives in the salt. Every grain of salt that touches your tongue carries her memory. Every tear that runs down your face when the world treats you cruel holds her strength. Every drop of sweat that falls from your brow while you working, while you struggling, while you enduring, that's Lucy reminding you that labor ain't forever, that suffering has an end, that justice is patient, but it always, always comes. She lives in the scars we carry, not just the visible ones, though Lord knows our people got plenty of those, but the invisible ones too. The scars on our hearts from watching loved ones suffer. The scars on our souls from living in a world that still don't value black life the way it should. The scars on our spirits from fighting battles our ancestors fought, and our grandchildren will probably fight too. Lucy's in every one of them scars, whispering, "The wound is where the light enters. The breaking is where the strength is born." She lives in the women. Oh Lord, especially in the women. In every black woman who's been told she's too loud, too angry, too much, too difficult, and kept speaking anyway. In every mama who's had to be strong when she wanted to fall apart. In every grandmother who raised children that wasn't hers because the system broke their parents. In every daughter learning to navigate a world that fears her power. Lucy's there in the backbone of black womanhood, in the steel wrapped in velvet, in the love that looks like toughness because tenderness alone don't keep you safe. She lives in resistance. Every small act of defiance, every time we say no, when the world demands yes. Every moment we choose dignity over survival, justice over peace. That's Lucy's spirit moving through us. She's in the protesters' march, and the workers' strike, and the students' walkout. She's in the grandmother who votes despite the obstacles, and the teenager who speaks truth to power, and the child who refuses to accept that's just the way things are. She lives in memory, our memory. The kind that don't get written down in official records but gets passed mouth to mouth, heart to heart, generation to generation. The memory that survives because we make it survive, because we tell the stories, because we refuse to let our dead be forgotten. Lucy's story is our story, the story of a people who endured the Middle Passage, who survived the auction block, who lived through Jim Crow and lynching and redlining and mass incarceration and police brutality and all the 1,000 ways this country has tried to destroy us. And yet we're still here, still fighting, still hoping, still believing that tomorrow can be better than today. She lives in the salt that seasons our food, our soul food, prepared with love and memory and tradition. Every pot of greens, every pan of cornbread, every slow-cooked meal that takes all day because some things can't be rushed. We salt them dishes without thinking, but that salt carries history, carries Lucy, carries every enslaved cook who found ways to poison masters without getting caught, every woman who fed the Underground Railroad, every grandmother who kept children alive on scraps and prayer. She lives in the hot wind that blows through Alabama on summer days. You can smell it if you pay attention. That faint scent of salt mixed with red clay dust and something else. Something ancient and powerful that makes the hair on your arms stand up. Old folks know that smell. Know it means the ancestors are close. Know it means Lucy's passing through, checking on her people, making sure we remember. She lives in the rituals we keep even when we don't know why we keep them. The salt thrown over the shoulder for protection. The line of salt across the doorway to keep evil out. The pinch of salt in the baptismal water. The salt rubbed on a newborn skin. These ain't superstitions, children. These are connections. These are ways we stay tied to Lucy, to her suffering, to her strength, to her reminder that even the most painful things can be transformed into protection, into power, into promise. She lives in every person who's ever been pushed too far, who's ever reached that moment where fear transforms into fury, where survival becomes secondary to dignity, where the calculation changes from, how do I live through this, to, how do I make this count? Lucy understood that moment, lived that moment, became that moment. And now she's there for all of us when we reach our own breaking points, whispering, this is your time, this is your justice, take it. I've been telling you this story for hours now, and your back's probably aching from sitting, and your heart's probably heavy from hearing all this suffering. But I need you to understand something crucial before we part ways. Lucy's story ain't a tragedy, it's a triumph. Yes, she suffered, yes, she was tortured in ways that should have destroyed her, but she didn't break. She transformed. She took everything they did to her and turned it into power, turned it into legend, turned it into a legacy that's lasted more than 150 years and will last 150 more. That's not a story of victimhood. That's a story of victory. So when you leave here today, when you go back to your lives and face whatever struggles are waiting for you, and we all got struggles, children, don't matter who you are, I want you to remember Lucy. Remember that woman who endured 40 days of salt in her wounds and still had strength to lift a boiling kettle. Remember that she didn't run, didn't hide, didn't apologize. Remember that she stood there after striking down her tormentor and said, I ain't ashamed. Remember that suffering don't have to be the end of the story. That pain can be the beginning of transformation. That the salt they put in your wounds can become the salt that preserves your memory, that seasons your strength, that marks you as someone who survived. And when the world gets too heavy, when the load gets too much to carry, when you feel like you can't take one more day of whatever you're enduring, that's when you'll feel her. Lucy DuSalle, standing beside you, invisible but present, silent but speaking directly to your spirit. And she'll remind you what she told every slave who ever heard her story, what she tells every descendant who carries her memory. You are stronger than you know. Your suffering is not in vain. Your justice is coming. Hold on. So I leave you with this, children. This final truth. This testament that I pray you'll carry with you and pass on to your children and your children's children. Lucy DuSalle was real. Her suffering was real. Her resistance was real. Her victory was real. And she lives still, not in body perhaps, but in spirit, in memory, in the very air we breathe when we stand up straight despite the weight trying to bend us down. She lives in the salt of our tears, in the fire of our anger, in the water that washes us clean, in the earth that holds our ancestors. She lives in the past as memory, in the present as inspiration, and in the future as promise. And every time you taste salt, every time you cry, every time you sweat from honest labor, every time you feel that burn of injustice in your chest, that's Lucy, reminding you, strengthening you, walking with you. The powerful thought they could break her. The system thought it could erase her. Time thought it could forget her. But they was all wrong. Because Lucy transcended all of them, became more than body, more than story, more than history. She became eternal. And her message echoes still, carried on the wind, preserved in the salt, remembered in the hearts of all who know her name. They tried to break me with 40 days of salt. But salt preserves, children. It don't destroy. And what they meant for my breaking became my making. What they meant for death became life everlasting. I am Lucy DuSalle. I endured, I resisted, I claimed my justice, and I live forever in every soul brave enough to do the same. So remember her name. Speak her story. Teach your children about the woman who couldn't be broken, who transformed suffering into strength, who proved that even in slavery's darkest pit, the human spirit shines eternal, who suffered, who resisted, left memory, and memory we keep here, alive and burning bright in the echoes from the quarters.